Hello, everyone, and welcome to another very special episode of Radio Free Golgotha. I'm Al. Hello. It's lovely to be here. Hi, Jesse.
Hello.
Today we are celebrating the Feast of St Camilla, and we have our array of various topics: demon, plant, stone, genre, style, category of magic, geomantic figure, and morphologically similar counterparting Odumeji, and Arcanum and Magician, who is dead as far as we are aware. That was very business up front straight away, wasn't it? Gosh.
Yes, you are mulleting. You are mulleting. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 35 of RFG. We are out of practice in recording. I don't know why there was out. It's because I was watching Outlander. Why is there a big Scottish lilt there? My ancestors would be proud. So, hello, yes, we are celebrating the Feast of St Camilla as one of our late in the month, but quite interesting saints who's technically newer as far as canonization. And so there was a little bit of the reacquainting myself with processes of canonization and things like this, just for the sake of it, because I also know that the Italian teenager, the millennial saint, is getting canonized. His second miracle has been confirmed. That is like patron saint of computer programmers, because he did a website that reports miracles to try and bring people back to the faith. Anyway,
Hot new saint just dropped.
He will be, yeah. He will be Saint Carlo. So Saint Camilla, not named for the vampire novel, proto-vampire novel, but 31st. She died actually pretty aged as far as that time period goes, but she was, I believe, a plague death, and canonized in 2010. So anyway, we might as well name the other subjects as we normally do, because here's out of practice. So hi, once again, for the very first time today.
Hello.
Hello. If don't know who we are, this is not the best introduction to who we are, or perhaps it is the only introduction to who we are. To whomst we are. So our saint of the day is Saint Camilla. Our demon is Steven Segal.
Right out the gate. Yeah.
Right. And Segal's corresponding Exu, who is Gira Mundo, the world turner. Surprised as all holy munchkins to find out that we have not covered Mugwort yet, or Opal, scrying, which are actually our topics today as well, not just out of non sequitur as usual for me. Although we're kind of geomantically, there's an underskirting, less focus on outright on geomancy and tarot outright, because outright, I might as well say it one more time, outrightly we have discussed them a lot, but still to throw Via and the Wheel of Fortune in there to see what they stir up. Which is also, I can already see the connections there with Dolores, who is our quote unquote magician, like dead.
Question mark?
Yeah. So uprising at the end of my voice. English tonal frequencies. There we go. So L.W. Dolores, who is most famous for the books of magic, and maybe because he's modern and know a little bit more about him, we doubt whether or not he's practicing, because I realized, I don't know if anybody who ever wrote a grimoire in ancient times was just writing a fanciful fiction, or making good business at churning out papyri at 2 gold pieces. I don't know where this is going.
No, there's a bunch of angles on that, exactly, like the sense of like influence and commercial success against where is material coming from, which is a perpetual question we should be asking about grimoires. And yeah, he's a fascinating case study at the very least.
Yeah,
So
certainly.
excited to get into him, yeah, and talk about some of the ways that he's promulgated and presented and transmitted a bunch of texts which have a lot of relevance to all sorts of practices around the world. So yeah,
And similarly, I mean, well, I guess we'll get this when we get to him. We, even if he is not admittedly a magician by people's kind of backtribution of what is his real story going on here and his,
mm,
the crimes against humanity, but that he is cited as an authority and a magician in Caribbean litanies of famous magicians because of the availability of his book.
yeah,
So it's one of those things where is he a magician? I can't hear you over folk practice,
yes,
naming him as such. Uh,
yes.
so I always like these types of internal hypocritical, not hypocritical, but confusions that I see both sides. I
Yeah.
am the devil's own advocate of the devil. Uh, I am the devil's advocate on both sides. Anyway, so May 31st, St. Camilla, let's do it.
Let's do it. So yeah, she's despite being like canonized in what, like you said, like 2010. She's we've got pretty good dates for her birth. It seems she's born on the 9th of April, 1458, and dies 31st of May, 1524. She's from Camerino in Italy, and she's kind of literally a princess, and becomes a nun of the Poor Clare tradition, and indeed an abbess in time.
Yeah.
And
I
as okay, go on, please.
I like that she's a rich girl,
Yeah.
who's basically like, I want to be a nun, and daddy says no, and amongst other things, eventually he buys her a convent.
Yes, that's how she becomes an abbess, it seems. She is elected, to be fair, but yes, that's also a piece of the thing, right? Like, okay, fine. But yes, she's a princess. You're for being married off. That's what you're meant to do.
Daughter of
Um,
Julius Caesar, right? That's the fun part. His name Julius Caesar.
yeah.
Um, yeah, but so as you say, like we're what 200 years after St. Clare's death,
Mm.
and Poor Clares are a pretty widespread order at this point in Italy and have a certain amount of power. But she was 9, right, when she heard a Franciscan friar preach and asking for everyone to shed one tear, so the children in the audience, as it were, to shed one tear for the passion of the Lord. And that kind of hit home with her, and so she spent every Friday trying to make herself shed one tear. And so this starts her off in that way. There's a sympathy with the wounds of Christ, and as such is one of the as many saints are by extension a Good Friday saint, in the sense of turning every Friday into a memory of the Passion. But sorry, go on. I just love the Julius Caesar and Daddy Convent.
Yeah, he's the Duke of Camerino. So I guess yeah, princess is not necessarily, yeah. There are different. There's a lot of different kinds of rich and royal and aristocratic. Yeah, so she's like often in like the biographies I've just been kind of skimming over. She's often framed as having these periods of like deep spiritual struggle. There's a lot of like not wanting the world. It seems, at least she's characterized in that kind of way, but also seeking to, you know, glorify God's work. And with this particular interest, focus on the sufferings of Jesus, right? And I don't know if we want to get into, because again, she's a rich girl, so we actually have a pretty good record of the stuff she's up to from being a kid into her 20s and onwards, actually, I guess. And she has a bunch of stuff around, it seems over her childhood, like slowly withdrawing from being recorded as, playing like kids do and doing the kinds of, needlework and music that she's encouraged to as an aristocratic little girl, into more and more of these like withdrawing into spiritual meditation and reflection. And it's in these that she begins to have a series of a variety of visions, right? As far as I can tell, kind of starting in a mid to late 20s. the three that I kind of found were there's the one of her earlier visions where she claims that Christ appears and bestows or shows or reveals these three fragrant spring lilies, right, of these different lessons about the world, which are, at least as they're listed here, I couldn't find the primary text. The first, she says, is an intense hatred of the world. The second is a heartfelt humility. And the third is a burning desire to endure evil, right? So, like, I feel that frames a lot of how she gets talked about, at least. And she enters monastery of Poor Clares at Urbino in November of 1481 and takes the name Battista. And she talks, there's some interesting stuff about framing her own life by not like Stations of the Cross, but in biblical terms, right? That she's describes like leaving the material, the kind of material world of, yes, her father's pressures for her to marry, to secure further fortunes for the house and so on, as like being freed from the slavery of Egypt, referring to her father directly, it seems, as escaping from the hands of Pharaoh, right? And that leaving courtly life she described as like crossing the Red Sea and finding herself in a monastery, which she seems to have described as the desert of holy religion. So there's this notion we get of like these saints to be, like obviously is, as we said, canonized in the 21st century, but this idea of already framing her life in biblical terms. This isn't just like scholarship or this is a sense of understanding her life by these terms, and within those and as those are happening, she has like three main visions after that get talked about. Mostly she has a vision of St. Clare herself, of Assisi, which apparently lasts like 15 days. And this is, again, I don't know, this is something we can get into when we start talking about scrying, like the idea of a vision not just being like a moment, but like something that can linger, especially towards some of the other ones. A few days after that, she's said to have had a vision of two cherubim holding her, holding her at the feet of Christ. Seems to be like on the cross, like these bleeding feet, and that lasts for 2 months. Apparently, there's this notion of like where is her soul, and she talks about her soul being placed up there while she's wandering around, even in like daily monastic life.
Yes.
And then there's another vision following this of God's love as well. So given that, like, I think it'd be cool to kind of dig into these visions a little more, because she does write a lot, and she's regarded as an excellent and important writer in her context and afterwards. And so she does talk about what these mean to an extent as well. What were some of the things that kind of moved you about those?
I'm with Camilla. I've always been attracted to the vision of wandering around as if your soul is not with you, even though the soul is in a safe place, supposedly, right? And it's being held up by cherubim. But this idea of the soul being separatable from the body in this way is kind of a strange vision. It reminds me of, even though she is already in an era where witchcraft as a political crime has been invented by this point in West, in France and Spain, it's not quite common parlance yet. And because she's wealthy, she wouldn't suffer that. But the visions themselves are not necessarily anything of church standard. Like, the church doesn't know how to combat legitimate vision from illegitimate vision. It's only based on the behavior of the person and what it means for them, right? Yeah. And oftentimes the more difficult people are just put in more isolated convents or monasteries and, put in a cell and fed and, hit or miss. It reminds me a little bit of Ben's talk, where he was talking about how, like, Tibetan Buddhism will rope in the craziest of people on the outside by a monk will go like, I remember when we lived this life together, and suddenly they're now in the fold in this way. Yeah. In the same way, like, someone having extreme religious visions and whose father donates a convent or donates the money to build a convent They're going to make sure she's taken care of. I'm not denouncing her visions in that way. It's interesting to consider that if this had happened 300 years later, there could be extreme doubt about
Yeah.
what she's saying, and it could have cost her life.
Yeah.
Um, she has a couple of those quotes that are interesting of like, I was misquoting it before we started. It's kind of like, oh, dirty soul, why don't you see how good the world is? But it's actually, oh, wretched soul of mine, why do you not take a little comfort in remembering all this goodness? Uh,
Hmm.
and then, so it's just, she has a few things like that of, oh my God, why do you wish to make of this false and what do you wish to make of this false and wayward soul? What need did you have, sweet Jesus of my deeds, that you sought me and yearned for me so insistently? What fruit, what exchange have I rendered to you, my Lord? Which it feels a little bit like a humble brag of like, God wants me so much and I don't even know why or what I did. And it's, I feel like I'm being really unnecessarily harsh with her, but it's just interesting to look at her words.
Yeah.
Um, and, you know, the whole thing of the Lord saying to her, when she's going through her troubles of like, uh, the when do I go into religious life or not? And she basically hears God tell her like, do what you want, go into the world, but you won't like it there. You're not going to do well there.
Hmm.
And it reminds me of just recent discussions of people like what it means to be. Um, in this case, she's, what is, because she could never be a priest in this culture, but like, what is it to be religious? What is it to be a pastor? And can you still enjoy truly the things that everybody else does? What is it to be a priest? And can you truly enjoy everything else everybody does? Or is that divide once that's drawn? If you're going to be a good priest, a good pastor, a good nun, what does that mean? What are you giving up? And is the gain enough for you to not feel like you have an imprisoned heart, in her words?
Yeah.
So there's definitely a foreboding over how she feels. She lives until she's 63, and that's pretty good for that time period.
Yeah.
But I remember in her stories, her father and her three brothers are excommunicated and strangled. And she has to run and she has to seek asylum in a different convent and things like there's a lot of political things going on in this time period. And it's interesting. I also find because there she's a modern saint, she had to have fit the modern um what do you call it, processes of canonization,
Hmm.
which is two miracles. She has had a third confirmed, but it's interesting. So from the site that's dedicated to her, they talk about it. In the 1950s, two miracles were attributed to her. The two miracles came from a young child at a Methodist hospital in South Philadelphia and a man nearby in New Jersey. So in April 1983, the Varani family was contacted by the Poor Clare Monastery in Camerino, Italy, requesting signatures petitioning for the canonization of St. Camilla Battista Varani. Thousands of signatures were gathered and sent to the Vatican. The third miracle, which led to her canonization, took place in 1877. So, the cure of a girl named Cecilia Ottaviani from Camerino, who suffered from rickets. St. Camilla's cause for canonization was then delayed for about 100 years due to problems with the original postulator.
Hmm.
They didn't find that it was the most veracious, and the case was taken up again in the late 90s, and it passed. So at that point, there were three confirmed miracles, and by 2010, Emperor Palpatine approved the authenticity of the third miracle, and she was canonized.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, this idea of the dive into canonization, which we've talked about several times.
Yeah.
But again, that one miracle leads you to be beatified. Two miracles is all you need for canonization. Technically, one miracle if the Pope and the cardinals unanimously say this person is obviously religious
Hmm.
and obviously in heaven. And it goes to like that weird Catholic theology that we've talked about so many times, with the judgment card and things like that, that like, except for the saints, most people are unconscious in a limbo until the second coming, where they will be bodily resurrected.
Right.
Their soul is not with God currently. They are in stasis, um, going on a deep space dive.
Hmm.
And the whole point of miracles is to show that the saint it shares in the beatific vision of heaven, that they are in God's presence and therefore can perform miracle posthumously.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that the prot's going to prot about this, right? Of like, the saints are kind of especially newer saints, not necessarily what you want to hear about and talk about of like, what do you mean this differentiation between the everyday person and this elect max of classism and a lot of other things that are going on with it, and can you buy your way in like many saints seem to have, and not even in this case because she obviously lived a religious life and it's not like it's not a crime for her to come from money,
Right.
but it's interesting to see what the relationship between all of those things is, and the idea that um, hmm, I don't know. There's something interesting to me about the the sharing in the beatific vision of heaven is a foreshadowing of many things to come, but that two miracles seems excessively small in some way.
Mm,
To be like that you're a saint because two miracles, and miracles are now extremely difficult to prove. The church is very critical about what a miracle is.
yeah.
There can be no medical explanation whatsoever, not even a hint. And that's also so that they themselves don't have doubt cast upon them, I'm sure.
Right.
But so yeah, I find Camilla as lovely as any saint to meditate on. I like that she's outspoken. I like that she's a writer and a woman in that time period.
Yeah.
So for her to produce, what is it, at least 4 books, and kind of sassy and snappy, and that's great. I enjoy her joie de vivre and her spunk. I certainly identify with her like weird versions of like I'm a prisoner in this world, but I'm also made myself a prisoner in this convent. I also think that there's a little bit of a parallel to like what Catholics don't tend to do this. It tends to be low Protestant, and I hate that altitude differentiation. But by that I mean like evangelical and Baptist families who know the Bible really, really well and send out their letters like once or twice a year, where it's almost like an academic paper for Christ, where they replace half their sentences with Bible quotes.
Hmm.
And it's a very common thing in American Protestantism to do such, to send out your Christmas mailer and to say that like if someone is having you mention your child and say that you're very excessively proud of them this year because as a teenager life is hard, but they have stood in the defense of their friends, recognizing that let he was without sin cast the first stone, or like before you criticize a splinter in your neighbor's eye, take out the plank in your own, and like they'll figure out how to work all these things in.
Yeah.
And then I also enjoy when it's the like and taking one step further, which isn't. And the reason I'm saying this is because it reminds me of what you were saying of how her saying like my life, this dramatic like I know the Bible and it's what I'm going to reference, but like have you cast me out like a Jezebel, untrue to you, and all these other things, and like it becomes it's kind of wonderfully melodramatic. Saying we only have this one popular text, really. The Golden Legend is its own thing, but obviously she's working with what she knows and she's manipulating as she can, in the name of God. I also like it when those same letters shorthand things so much that it becomes like the bottom of the fry containers or the bottom of the bags, where it's just like John 17:31,
Yeah.
and Hebrews 9,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, okay, cool. It kind of reminds me of how some Orisha when they come down will mention Odu names as like they're like, you know what I'm saying if I say this. So it's
the oral footnoting.
yeah, exactly. It's like I don't want to talk that much, but like, can they name an Odu and they tell you it, you're supposed to go, yeah, got it, cool. Like they're not going to waste their words on you, but they'll tell you, oh, all the proverbs associated with this. Here you go. That's what this person is. And so I like the short note, the footnoting, as you're saying, the oral footnoting, which is again some form of humble. Not when an Orisha does it, perhaps, but certainly within a Bible. I mean, it would be encouraging that if I had an alternate life plan, that it'd be like, how many weird jargons can I make out of biblical reference that you don't understand? The average person, the pleb, doesn't know what I'm saying, which is an interesting side of it too. If you're taking the opposite of like trying to make the scripture accessible,
Yes.
and then being like, oh yeah, I'll show you, and like my words will be so secret I can only reference things in apocrypha.
Yeah, the kind of labyrinth you can construct out of sending people 12 different places in one sentence, right?
Yeah.
I think of how, the Eliot's Wasteland was taught as as this like great text of like a billion allusions in every sentence, and how like that got opened up when people started being able to, I think we've talked about this before, being able to hyperlink, right? You can actually like pull that thing up and have multiple tabs open. And that makes me think also of the those amazing book wheels. I desperately want a monastic book wheel where you could have, you know, the equivalent of 50 tabs open, because you had all these books on like multiple lecterns on a wheel that you could spin around and be like, okay, yeah, let me reference Isidore here. Let me go back to Augustine here.
It's true. Although I will say, I don't know if there's some web page that was showing that on their book wheel, you can see where the person spilled a drink and it dribbles and destroys like like half of the wheel.
With great power.
And I was like, the people that would need open books all at the same time are the exact people that will spill drinks on those books. But also, as someone who had a room once where I built a desk the entire length of one wall, this is also very helpful, and you can kind of just roll down the thing and like, oh yes, and this, and you can have like a whole double row of open books. But yeah, it's interesting. And what's the moral of this story is that endnotes were designed to break the spines of a book and make you buy a new one. But also better at holding attention spans, right? Like there's something too of like the neurodivergence is real when we're like, a hyperlink, excellent, let me click it. I don't need to know what the word trans means. I know what trans means. I know what mantra means. I'm looking, like, it becomes this thing of like, okay, how many times have I distracted myself on the way to get it?
Why am I looking at baseball statistics from 1974 now?
Yes. And if you click on the word in the first part of the Wikipedia article over and over and over, eventually we'll all come back to philosophy.
The philosophy loop. Yep. How does the hand bandage itself? Yeah. How do we talk about talking about ideas? Yes. So I guess it's interesting that like there's this sense of, you know, I don't know how much this is just stating something that I'm trying to find the significance of, but it just sounds really obvious. But like, there's a sense here again of like not just her saintly status, but her capacity to be a saint. You know, with like this, like 4 centuries in between when she dies and when she's finally canonized, and so this idea of like she's like you said, they rejected it. The process of her canonization was kind of halted with lack of evidence at one point. But a popular movement doesn't necessarily emerge from nowhere. And so this idea of, I find it interesting that she did actually end up returning to Camerino after one of the change in rulership. The new Pope Julius II. In 1503, so she gets to return to her kind of homeland, which is where she dies and where her remains are placed in the crypt of the monastery of the Poor Clares in Camerino, and that's where these few miracles that are recorded at least do start happening. And so we have, yes, the idea of like those restless bones are doing something useful, but we also have the influence of her writings, her spiritual life, her treatise on the mental sufferings of Jesus our Lord, which is said to be like a best known and most kind of praised book. There's various others, and I think there's a variety of letters and things as you know, people of learning and spiritual reflection also, you know, have epistolary lives. So I find it interesting that like, yeah, this influence comes is maybe a slow boil, right? I guess we could put it like that. But this idea that like your writings on your sufferings and on the sufferings of the Christ can also be something that motivates people to seek you out, that you can leave things, you can leave traces in the world in a lot of ways. As I say, like, I'm not trying to be like, you know, that stoned guy at a party being like, have you ever thought about like breathing, man? But like, yeah, the idea that, you know, these writings outlive her, and I guess there's a lot of different tiny reflections that can make a difference, and like the ripples we leave. It made me kind of end up thinking about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's something there about, like you said, like the folk devotion doesn't come out of nowhere. And although the church has kind of refined its canonization process, it's also worth noting because I remember when like God love him, the discussion with Jake, right, about Cyprian, a folk. Cyprian's not a folk saint. Cyprian's an official saint who is removed from the general Roman calendar, but is still has a feast day and can therefore be celebrated locally, and churches can be dedicated to him.
Right. Removing from the calendar is more of like it's not a censure or a like decanonization necessarily.
Yeah, which is treated as people say that, oh, the Catholic Church made them not a saint. You can't make the Church of St. Barbara no longer St. Barbara. It doesn't make sense. But St. Barbara being a pre-denomination or pre-canonization or pre-congregation, that's what they say, pre-congregation church saint, she was already, whether it's legend, personage, or whatever, these people have been prayed to as saints, as legitimate saints.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting part there that even through canonization, the second miracle only gives them access, like that saint is equal to St. Barbara. They are not necessarily on the general Roman calendar at all. Not necessarily. They're not. They have the same rights and privileges as Cyprian and Justina. And yet it's interesting that people make the big deal out of the new canonization, but they also make a big deal saying that those saints that were removed in Vatican II from the general Roman calendar, which was to dissuade worship of non-historical persons. And not worship, because Catholics, we say we don't worship, right? But there's so much going on there. It's interesting to say, oh, the saints are taken away, and yet new saints are only elevated to the point where they're equal to the saints that got taken away. They can be celebrated locally. You can have a church. You can continue to do things, but it doesn't mean that they are every May 31st, that every church in all of Christendom, in all of Catholic Christendom, is going to be saying, this is the Feast of St. Camilla.
Right. It's not a football league. You don't get relegated if you don't, score enough goals or whatever. Like, yeah, everyone is at the right hand, right? There's plenty of room at the table for everyone. Yeah, good point.
So speaking of biographical information, in which there seems to be, at least obviously we have her writings, her life story, and the actual miracles that are attributed to her on very easily publicly accessible record. What about Steven Seagal?
Well, there's a lot of actors coming forward now saying that he was a nightmare to work with. So I want to talk
all
about
that Aikido training, right? Where did it go?
I know, right? It's like, oh, come on, we got to have a better poster boy. No, it's not Aikido's fault. It's not O-sensei's fault. Okay, so actually
it's O-sensei's failure. Sorry, O-sensei. No, much respect to Aikido and
he's busy being a tree. All right, yeah. He's got stuff to do.
Well, I guess you know why he's not an eighth dan. So anyway, it's so I'm sorry for my really bad dad joke. So Segal, Segal.
Yeah. Also, Segal, Segol. Also, Fegol, which feels a little bit like, is that just one of those fancy looping S's that someone thought as an F? And Fagot as well. Again,
excuse me,
is that an L or a T? Yeah, she said Fagot. Fegot. Yeah. So this is a spirit of the Grimorium Verum, and indeed the predecessor text, the Clavicula Salmonis de Secretis, and turns up in most of the editions. They're around the 10th spirit mentioned, I believe, under Duke Sirac or Sirac, and they have a short description. They are not present, as far as I am aware. There aren't in the books of supernatural secrets that are appended to Verum editions or versions, which are the actual spell work you do either once you've done the formal pact or in a lead up to doing it as a sort of getting to know you on the job kind of thing. I don't think Segal is mentioned as being like as leading any of those workings. So we have a little less to go on. The way the way their office, and again, Verum offices are pretty short. We don't usually have one of the longer descriptions that we get from the kind of Key of Solomon type offices, where it talks about, you know, what kind of, you know, the head of a lion and the body of a different lion, as I've said before. What we get is very short in general. It's usually translated that Segal's main office is to cause all sorts of prodigies to appear. And it is actually worth looking at the Latin here, because it gives us a bunch of ways to go with the words. Spoiler alert, sometimes grimoire magic is about thinking about words and about making those words operative in various ways. So the Latin talks about prodigious monstra, talks about chimeras. And
I'm pretty sure it's prodigious monstra.
Thank you, Hermione Hathaway.
Yeah.
So
Unfortunately,
that's often translated as Segal is able to create terrifying and wonderful monsters, and he will create for you such exciting fantasies. Joseph H. Peterson translates that as has the power to fashion fearsome and freakish monsters, and will fashion all kinds of chimeras you can think up. There is a variant text where it seems to say that you wish to call up. So there's a couple things going on there. There's the idea of like creating or fashioning a monster versus calling one, right? The idea of like it can fashion anything you can think of, or it can fashion anything you can call up. And so there's again this this blurring between the idea of what you can conceptualize and what you can conjure, right? And that's really present in the way that this office is usually taken, which is either to lean into the prodigy side of it, from the Latin prodigium, right? An omen or a portent of something at the root, it seems just extraordinary or unnatural, signs or events believed to foretell future occurrences. That starts to have a negative connotation. So we have this idea of omen stuff, of bringing up omens, and of monstrous creatures, of chimeras. And so I think the words and terms that are useful to explore in my few interactions with the spirit have been around what is it to have an office related to prodigies, monsters, and chimerae, right? Whatever that plural is. So we have this idea that a prodigy comes to, so looking at like where do we get like a child of exceptional abilities seems to come in from around 1650. It meaning a person or thing so extraordinary as to excite wonder or astonishment is from 1620s, a little bit earlier. And so again, on the one hand, we have a sign and a being, right? An event and a personage or an entity. And again, we can link that by understanding like every like classical work on monsters. I had a couple pals in grad school who were doing things on that. They all were like, we have to start with, in the same way that like, you know, so many witchcraft books, like we have to start with talking about the Murray thesis. They're like, we have to point out that monster means warning, right? And so again, monster from at least like the early 14th century is a malformed animal or human or a creature afflicted with some kind of abnormality of birth, right? A monstrosity. But that itself is also from the Latin monstrum, meaning a divine omen, especially a misfortunate one, right? It's still a miracle, even if it's bad, right? And so this comes to mean, you know, have all sorts of connotations of like abomination, but it's also derivative of monere, to remind, to bring to one's recollection, right? As well as to admonish, advise, warn, teach, and so on. So again, the further we like kind of try and peel back the different things this might mean, there's this admixture between what's an omen, what's a thing that we can mark and know from, and what's an entity that can also tell us something either by its strangeness or its appearance, or indeed its like actions. And so like, yeah, prodigious or abnormal animals are often themselves regarded as signs or omens, right? That the world is out of whack in some way. And then from the late 14th century, we get fabulous animals that are composed of other parts of creatures, like centaurs and my beloved griffins, as also being referred to as monsters. And this itself, again, gets is worth us looking at how the chimera is a specific monster, if we want to call it that, right? It's the one slain by Bellerophon. It's it's a lion's head, a goat's body, and a dragon's tail. So we do have, there is some trace of a goetic office going on here, and that indeed is like, let's be clear, that's where those offices kind of come from. Is this idea of like a monstrous apparition of any kind, right? Is going to be made of bits and pieces of various other things. And I think there's also, I don't know, let's get too far on a tangent, but there's also for me a reflection, again, if we're going to go back and forth between talking about actual entities and talking about our understanding of them, how we mark them as significant, how we make wisdom out of knowing them, like marking the portent of them, that like there's a lot of existential philosophy on like what we know, how we engage with the unknown, what we don't yet know, is by reconstructing what we already know, right? That if not consciousness itself, then certainly an awful lot of epistemology has a cut-up quality to it. How do you describe a giraffe to someone who's never seen a giraffe, right? We see this all over the bestiaries and things like that. Of like, well, it's kind of like a horse with a serpent for a neck, right? Or however you're going to frame it. We have, we rely on what we already know to work out what we don't yet know, or to frame it, or to even conceive of it, right? And again, conceiving, right? This word, which again is the birthing of something, and also is the birthing of an idea as well as of a thing. So we can get into some real weeds here. But looking at chimeras gets really interesting because it also starts to have a connotation with marking things that happen in time. It looks like the word itself comes from the Greek kaima, which means either like the winter season, which might have a Proto-Indo-European root in gaim or kaim, which is winter, but also that like, so it might be a winter creature, it might be an allegory for the problems of winter, but it's also, there's an ancient habit of calling years winters, of counting winters. It's been many moons, right? It's been many winters. There are like ancient sources that refer to the chimera as representing a volcano, as well as like winter storms specifically, which apparently is another sense of like, winter is coming, is not just like, oh, it got colder. There's all sorts of other stuff that happens, right? And so this admixture of grotesque monsters formed from other parts and of the way the world changes and is changed, things that shake up the world, things that show us that the world is being shooken up, right? Back to, debates about astrology from at least Ptolemy onwards of like, are the stars presaging what's happening? Are they like symptoms of fates unfolding and the grinding of the starry dynamo of night? Or are they themselves causing those things, right? The very things that upend the natural order. Is it disease, or is it a symptom thereof? And so Segal ends up having a lot of these connotations. The simple part is that people tend to either work with the spirit as teaching you how to mark kinds of augury, not necessarily the flight of birds specifically, but of marking significances of riding the synchronicity highway, if we like, and of granting familiars of various sorts, specifically kind of Frankensteining the spirit you need from different parts. And so they have that kind of recruitment consultant role that other spirits that we've talked about in the Verum are also capable of doing, the ones that grant familiars and things like that. I think that Segal's a fascinating example of like how much we can get at from very little in these texts, and that even the words being used, even if whether we're talking de secretis formulating in the 16th or maybe even 17th century, and definitely more of the modern editions of Verum coming around in the 18th and 19th century. That Jake's version itself is now a version in the 21st century. Is another iteration of it. That like they do harken back to indeed a lot of like ancient Greek conceptions of time and spirits, in allegory, right? Yeah. So that's been my TED talk. There's other bits and pieces about like where they fit in the Verum. If I know not everyone who works with Verum subscribes to this kind of idea that this practice that I found very helpful, which is conceiving of the 18 spirits under Duke Sirac as being subdivided into working groups of 3 spirits under each of the 6 deputies. But it's not explicitly in the text, but there's nothing against it either. And it seems to work, and they seem to respond like that. And having an extra layer of supervision over these follower or subordinate spirits has always been useful in my book. So if we go by that, then Segal is under Beelzebub, and depending on which version of the deputies, because they kind of shift around as administration and bureaucracy shifts, and as different versions of it come out and different spirits kind of vie for authority. I've certainly worked with them under Flaherty, and that means that they're thinking about their guild mates, if you like, the other 2 spirits that they seem to have this affinity with, or that can be called together easily, are High Pact, whose office is to bring people to you. It's said that they make distant people present to you. And again, that's not clear how much that's visions of them and how much that's actual travel. There is another spirit that also does travel, Masildi, where it's a bit more explicit. And in my experience, High Pact and Masildi don't get on with each other. But I've certainly worked with High Pact to actually facilitate people's physical transport. And the other spirit that Segal is kind of in this guild structure with is Humans, who's famously or infamously brings you any book you want. And so there's this quality of bringing things to you with these 3 spirits. This quality of like the research magician who is, there's guilds that are very much about like when you are traveling or to help you travel or to do things on the fly. And then under Beelzebub and the other set under Flaherty seem a lot more about like getting in your wizard tower and having things come to you in various ways. And so between being able to bring people to you, bring books to you, there's also the sense of bringing either spirits or important news to you with these 3 spirits.
Yes.
yes. As I say, this has been my demonic TED talk. They're not a spirit that like immediately, in my experience, has lent themselves to being like, I work with this material and I do this thing. There's been things I've done, the marking of, it's another one of the spirits that seems to be into the marking of time in various ways. I've like worked with them through using a calendar, using pages from a calendar for petitions and things like that. I have indeed worked with them with opals. They seem into those. And again, in exploring the animalia of chimeras themselves, less as I am Segal, I require a goat horn and a dragon egg and an a lion's tooth, but finding those kinds of ingredients as tools to give to the spirit to do their work, to make these chimeras. Mm-hmm. So I think any spirit can give you an insight into grimoire magic if we can talk about it as a whole. It's a varied and variable set of practices and traditions of innovation. But this spirit, like in terms of thinking about how we mark an appearance of something and what that means about how the world is not just but is changing, how it marks the change in the world or an upsetting or an upturning of it. And I think that is interesting in terms of like the pressures that having a wizard tower and being holed up somewhere and doing your work and being like withdrawn from the world or bringing the world to you, to your circle, is not just a process of holding yourself up in a castle. It's also understanding that like you need to know when the storm is coming and when to batten down the hatches and so to speak.
Mm.
So I don't know if that's like yeah. I mean that's hopefully a useful point to kind of reflect on some of the counterparting virtues and I guess vices of the issue that gets corresponded via the kind of adoption or reflection on the Verum hierarchy with Gira Mundo. Yeah, I'll pass it over to you at that point, I think.
I mean, Gira Mundo is everywhere at all times, right? It's a Das Almas kingdom Eshu, and is said to be in every kingdom. The Das Almas snobbery of being able to be all things at once. He says is a Das Almas allianced person, but so although he's not confined to one area, there is this tendency for Gira Mundo. He's a shit stirrer, and I mean that in both a good way and a bad way. Like if things are stagnant, he will stir it. If things are great, he will stir it. It's very difficult to guide him to a specific aim. So much as do you need things stirred so that you can see what the situation is? Great. So he can be an ally in divination because of that, in my opinion. Like things seem fine, but the person's not doing well. And you're like, okay, Gira Mundo can stir shit up. It might actually make them a little sicker or a little bit less well, but you'll be able to see what's going on. He is, despite being called world turner, he's heavily associated with water. He works very well with Eshu Kalunga, and therefore talking about Kalunga, Granji of the ocean. But the little eddies that form like little whirlpools and things like that. This is really what he is. Even though some of his iconography is him holding a globe, it's less the globe turning and more your world. Like you suddenly are on a carousel and you thought the ground was stable. That's Jim. And so it also goes to the site of it of like things that turn over at the water's edge, things that are revealed in water. Patron of some say a patron of people whose bodies who drowned in water, and also interesting connection therefore to John the Baptist, who is said to as through using river water in that way. But the Gira Mundo inspires this like paradigmatic change that can happen when someone truly embodies his força.
That's fascinating. Yeah, so a sense of the image of like I really like what you're saying about like when you do a reading for clients and they're objectively not doing well, whether like internally or endopsychically in mind and heart or in their circumstances, but divination doesn't necessarily immediately point out like they're under attack or they've not done this thing or what have you. So the idea of like shaking we talk about divination as a petri dish, but like shaking the sample bottle to see what stirs up is really interesting. As is the idea of like you don't get to direct the change, but you can call it if things aren't going well. Yeah, I guess that idea that when things are bad, and that's why someone goes to a diviner or a worker with hot spirits, that they can say things are bad and I need them to change. But the notion that you don't necessarily get to pick the destination or even the means by which that ticket to ride actually like takes you there.
I think akin to like as far as a visual of like a little paper boat put in the river, but there's little eddies that flow it. It can get lost on it. It's not just going straight across the way you thought. This is all Gira Mundo. It brings up to a larger extent of like the character of Eshu as who are these creatures, these gachizos, these spirits that take their name from the deity of accident and the argument that you can survive and fate and destiny as a sense of destination. And so I think there's something interesting to muse on there. Certainly he's stable in his instability. It's interesting to think of, as far as the hierarchies that are there. This is an issue that in the larger flow of force, I guess you can say, like that's based upon the Grimorium Verum is, Dos Ventos is right um, under sorry, I'm going all over the place, under Columna there.
Mm.
And so the whole quality of this line, this phalanx, do they share anything with the Exus above them in quality and in temperament? Because there is an argument that you could make with all of these, that there is something shared in that. I think if you look down the line, right, Colunga, Dos Ventos, Quebra Gallo, Pomba Gira is there, Seche Cachoeiras, Seche Cruces, Tronqueiras, Seche Poeiras, then Gira Mundo. Lentas Matas, Seche Pedras, again, as it continues to go down from there. And is there something, all of them have this, the Colunga is as this flow that's there. None of these are particularly still spirits, with the exception, maybe we might consider such a Cruces in that by nature of being Crusado, but he's still a different Eshu. He's very different from the other Crusado spirits and very different from all of the other cemetery spirits as far as alliance and how he works. But certainly Giramundo being directly under Seven Dusts, right, is its own interesting. Tronqueira is very stable, but is that because he's directly under Secha Cruces? I don't know. I'm curious what the this is the house that Jack built methodology that could be. Is this just investigating too much Fontenelle's like ascription to these between these spirits? Yeah. And because it doesn't come up in practice much, but what else are you going to do when you're on a train sometimes and have time to kill?
When is the organization useful, and what is it useful for, and when do we mistake the map for the territory? To quote, Saint Bob Wilson.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm not sure. I think Giramundo is good for stirring things up, and you might break a few things in the process, but sometimes you need that. Yeah. He does supposedly have a connection to like more Congolese ways of doing things, but this is something that comes through Umbanda and the kind of individual spirit stories that are there. I don't think it's necessarily un-Congolese to understand that this is how sometimes you have to stir shit up. That's just how it can work. That as a spirit of the souls, right, a spirit of the soul's kingdom, there's just going to be a lot of movement in general. That's how it works. Whether the spirit is still or not is its own nature. There's something to be examined there, I suppose. It does remind me of a little bit in what you're mentioning of there's an oil I used to sell that was Gethsemane, which is based on a Spanish formula from the 1700s that I had that was basically trying to force a change to the point where you didn't care how something ended, you just needed it to end.
Right.
And that is, it's a good musing on Gethsemane itself and what's going on there of like the sweat of blood type of thing of like, one way or the other, it can't be in this unknown limbo. It's like you're waiting for the verdict at a trial so that you can then assess how to move on with your life. But the verdict needs to be given one way or the other.
Yeah. That an answer is better than no answer, even if it's a bad answer.
Diagnosis, anything like that.
Diagnosis, yeah.
As someone who's struggling going in and out of a hospital and medical procedures for a very long time where nothing is being found out, Giramundo might be one that you could call upon to stir things up. You might also have to assess whether or not the person would get sicker first by doing this. But sometimes that's how you get things seen. Because the symptoms are now, like how many times in parallel and in specifics where you have something flare up, but when you go to the doctor, it's not flaring up, so the doctor doesn't know what you're talking about, or your friend doesn't know what you're talking about. And they don't see, it's like someone whose behavior is a certain way towards you, but no one else sees it. And you're like, you need someone to see how they treat you when no one else is around in order to understand what you're going through. All those types of things can happen. And there's a lot of Giramundo around all of those types of things. But there's also a lot of calling him king of the world in a lot of his pontos. And it's interesting because it always reminds me of like the Dune proverb of he who can destroy a thing controls a thing.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, if you think this is stable, let me pull a tablecloth out from underneath you and let the room spin, and we'll see who controls what.
And who you go to when the world's already in a spin, maybe, or would that be we'd be looking for more of a stabilizing force at that point.
Yeah, I think that the nature of many of our spirits is that they have a primary action that's neither good nor bad. At least in Quimbanda, like the impulse is what it is.
Yeah.
Whether it's observation or stability, or it's smoothing things out, or it's finding the sneaky way in. Like that's their thing, and Giramundo's thing is to spin.
Yeah.
So you could make it some way to work around it so that you become okay with the motion of the world that you're in.
Yeah.
But that's not the same as stability.
No.
That's acceptance, and that's something different.
It's a good distinction.
Yeah. So I think as much as I think that you can use him to stop things coming to shaking so much, only in the sense that he'll move on, not in the sense that the repercussions won't be there. If that makes sense.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Yeah.
There's a difference between something stopping and stabilizing versus the horrible person that's pushing the child's merry-go-round on the playground too fast, walks away from the merry-go-round. The child is still stuck on it for a while, trying to figure out how to get off. That's not the same adult who comes and slows it down and stops it.
Yeah. And so often in remediation, we're not just trying to work out what's wrong and stop it. We're also dealing with the consequences of what's already happened and the means to recover from it. Those aren't all the same thing.
No, they're not. I was just talking with a priest the other day. Someone can have a spirit removed from them, and the person doesn't know how to live without that spirit. And that's a completely different working and therapy and observation skill set that has to happen. So you can end up removing the same spirit from someone many, many times. And it's not that they're calling the spirit back to them with anything active. It's that they don't know how to fill what was taken or what's gone. And
they're so used to what's the word? Not reorienting. They're so used to making do that like the absence of that thing is also unbalancing.
Yeah, it's not quite the same as Stockholm, but it is something there akin.
Yeah.
Like I had a pet rat once, Thomas, who had a huge tumor. It kept on getting bigger and bigger, and it was the choice. The vet was like, "Do you want to operate or not?" And when his cage mate died, I was like, "Well, he's alone now. Let's operate and see if he's going to live." And he survived the surgery to remove the tumor that was like a third of his body at that point. It started off very small, and it grew within a few months. And the problem was not the tumor; it was that his heart had been compensating so much during that whole time to pump blood to the tumor that his heart gave out once the tumor was removed.
Yeah, that's it. That compensation, that like self-correcting, that then doesn't have
And they brought him back two times as a little rat, but they decided it was too much at that point. And but he had no tumor.
Yeah,
he died whole, as it were. But yeah, it's I think about that a lot. Of it's or even the kind of Gurdjieffian maxim of like quoting mountain climbing of like more people die going down the mountain than coming up. That you've reached the peak, you think you're good, you drop your guard, and you have lived with that certain amount of struggle, and now you're not paying attention, and you will succumb to gravity in a different way.
Right. How many issues of like recidivism or relapse happen in recovery, and if
Or even within a recovery parallel, not all triggers are stress. Or not stress in another way. Not all triggers are because of negative life experience, but can be because of a negative interpretation of positive life experience. So like, things can be going perfectly, quote unquote, for someone, and that can be so stressful because they don't know that. They don't know what that feels like or how to live with that. That could be a trigger for them to, start using again or falling off the wagon.
Yeah.
And that's its own thing. And that's external triggers are one thing to work with. Internal triggers or internal interpretations of external events is a whole other difficulty.
That peace is not the same as feeling at peace.
Yeah, or even questioning what peace is. Peace can be fought for. Is that true? Like we say that as the opposite of it, and then the Rent quote of like the opposite of war isn't peace, it's creation type of mentality, or remembering, I asked once after, I can't remember, it was probably 10 years ago, after one of the larger school shootings, they were talking about in this country of putting veterans, the commentators, putting veterans in schools with guns to prevent against school shootings. And my brother, who's, career military, I was just like, what do you think of that? He says, it's stupid because we're not trained to keep peace, we're trained to make peace. And those are two different things. So he was like, the military is not trained, like the peacekeeping is something different.
Yeah.
And like, it's just like the people that are the veterans that would be put into that, he's like, they don't have the training to do that. So it's setting everybody up for failure, which is not something they did anyway, but it's something that was a common problem. So like, let's give people these jobs and let's work together. And just the idea of like, I had a teacher who would talk about how within Nahuatl, language of the Aztecs, that the word for equilibrium is closer to what we would call peace, but that in no way implies rest. It implies constant struggle to maintain equilibrium. Equilibrium is not passive. It can be maintained through observing how the parts fit together, and that's a balance that a community or any system can find, but it is still something that is incredibly active. It's not something on both sides just sitting there. It's a constant exchange and what do you call it, compromise between both sides to balance out both sides of the equation.
Yeah.
And that's a very different thing. So, again, maybe there's something there with Gira Mundo of like, yes, to stop the turbulence is probably perhaps more about finding equilibrium than anything else, than it is about stopping all motion whatsoever.
Cessation,
Yeah. There's an interesting parallel then too between, or not parallel, but just like, a nice flow that happens since Gira Mundo is associated with John the Baptist, that Mugwort is also associated with John the Baptist.
Yes, his girdle.
Yeah, it's said to be his girdle, and sometimes loosely used as a crown, was worn by people specifically to avoid possession around St. John's Day when the sun is at its peak. So that's the interesting side too of like talking about what are they getting possessed by in medieval Europe at around St. John's Day, or is it specifically just being possessed by the heat and the insanity of that, and how there's many different local laws like in Spain that when the southern winds blow, that like everyone go indoors and do not talk to anyone because people are not even convicted of murder convicted of murder during that time because everyone goes insane. Just figure out how to stay cool. Do not do anything. Do not talk to anyone. Do not plan anything when those winds are blowing because they're too hot. And so it makes me think of like St. John's Day and the pinnacle of the sun and everything going on. There is, so much lore around that holiday as it is, and the serpent stealing the seeds of light and everything that goes in the kind of the performative dancing troops of everything from Morris dancers to the Pyrenees to Sardinia and Italy and the Balkans of these kind of ancient stories that are probably pre-Indo-European, but also as much Indo-European because they've survived and been modified. But anyway, John the Baptist, Mugwort, not possessed.
Woodvoice John is my favorite John the Baptist. His wild man, his like in skins, his Woodvoice phase or expressions. That wildness there. What happens in the forest and whether or not it stays in the forest.
Probably not with John the Baptist.
That's a great segue. There's been a couple like bits of John, right, with St Camilla taking Battista as a name as well. Another one of those unexpected connections. So Mugwort, Artemisia, and generally meaning Artemisia vulgaris, right?
Yes, but generally, when a plant is not too distinct from it within the Artemisia family, it's going to be called a mugwort or a regional mugwort. So, like, what's called mugwort in the area where I grew up is very different from the mugwort that is the European mugwort, and it's still called mugwort. I mean, the folk names are all over the place, right? But here, we're specifically the Artemisia douglasana is Western North America. And it is stronger in thujone than most wormwood.
Oh, wow.
So, as far as these things are like, oh, mugwort is the lesser cousin of wormwood and, has some thujone, but not as much. Douglasiana has a lot more on
Mm.
average, and so is the great, the artemisias that are the sagebrush of the West, and is the sagebrush that we're talking about when we talk about like Indian sage, not necessarily this white sage, which can also be used,
Mm.
but the high altitude sagebrushes are all artemisias. So I think there's a lot of interesting overlap there. But mugwort itself is easily identifiable. It has a very sweet smell, a slightly bitter taste. It has a distinctive leaf pattern. It is attested right in the Nine Herbs charm,
Mm-hmm.
and from the Laknuga.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that the lore around mugwort is old and long, and is not even just, it is such a widely dispersed herb, a widely volunteered plant, because it is essentially a weed in many places.
Right, it's hardy as
It's
hell, and it'll grow through concrete and stuff. Yeah,
absolutely
or around it. Yeah.
called mugwort because it's a flavoring herb for beer and other drinks.
Yes, probably. Yes. There's I was getting into some of the folk etymology and the debates about it, right? The wort of mugs, right? The thing that goes in your cup. It's certainly, we've got evidence of it being used to flavor drinks since at least the Iron Age in Europe. And it's also, versions of it turn up in a lot of Korean food and traditional Japanese foods as well. There are other,
you have the moxibustion, right? So within acupuncture, the
yeah.
to increase chi to an area.
Yeah, and I've also come across, like, at least anecdotally, talking to colleagues of ours whose teachers or people they've encountered did some traditional Chinese medicine training, and then combined moxibustion with moxibustion, I can say it, with like scrying the smoke, or
Yes,
things. Yeah, combining
holding a
different
mirror to
ways.
the smoke and that type of thing as well.
Yeah. It becomes very humoral, right? How is the smoke in contact with the body, or the dish that the thing's being burned on? Like, what does it say about the flow in the body as well? What's moving in the shapes, and what does that say about the flow and lack thereof around meridians, or other forms of wider humoral balance and imbalance? Yeah. There are other ideas around Mugwort or Mugwort around it being either for emphasizing its insecticidal nature, especially against larvae, which might be moths. The mukt might refer to moths. It might also refer to the word I grew up calling mosquitoes, midges, which apparently is actually Anglo-Saxon. So it might be mothwort, it might be midgewort, mosquito wart. It might even be marshwort, i.e., the thing you use in the place where those things breed and bite you and spread disease and stuff. And so, this is interesting debate, all based off what it actually does, and the evidence we have, which seems to stretch back pretty far about how it's resorted to by peoples. And then again, with any with almost any insecticidal, you've got the idea of it also repelling other things that are bad or spread bad things, right? So against evil spirits just in general, and also against other kinds of wild animal, which is also where I at least see what Stephen Gordon called it, like a prevailing social logic about, like, well, if it guards against wild animals, who's going through patches of wild animals or forests or swamps or marshes? Travelers. And so there's this connection to travelers that way, along with the fact that, like, it's a wayfaring plant that Roman soldiers put in their sandals, less as a safety and more as against fatigue, although maybe those two things kind of go hand in hand. If you're running away from wild animals, you're going to be more tired than if you're on a nice, steady, straight road.
Yeah. I mean, it has a lot of medicinal uses. It's not outright. I mean, it's within modern medicine, most of the people I know, in addition to like the pseudo magical effects of like encouraging dreaming and vision states and things like that, especially when smoked or drunk, especially in connection again to dreams, so that you can take it before bed. It's not about taking it to the point where you're poisoning yourself, but that it is taken orally to reduce minor aches and pains of the body. Can help with the liver because of its bitter nature, specifically releasing gall into the stream and things like that. It does seem to have some, it's called Cronwort by many people, because it does help regulate the menstrual cycle. It's antifungal. It has antimicrobial effects. So like, I know one teacher that swore that it was called mugwort because it's common to put a little bit of mugwort wool in your cups in the cupboard to prevent bugs from just falling in them because they won't go near the mugwort as much.
Yeah.
So it's easy enough to put a leaf or two or the mugwort. If you're not familiar with mugwort, when you dry it and grind it, it becomes fluffy. And it has a wool. It's called wool. It's very different from most plants that it does this. It's also one of the reasons that I think it's used for moxibustion in that way, because it makes this thing that can fluff up in that way. And it is the wool you burn in moxibustion, not the just the dried matter by itself. But it does have that digestive property because of its bitter nature. You can use it for many things. Might be helpful for some blood pressure and tumor growth and things like that. It definitely repels insects, and as do all the artemisias for the most part, to my knowledge. It as far as a food seasoning, I think it can leave a little bit to be desired, but I think that's perhaps an acquired taste. I do enjoy mugwort. Is it like rice cakes and mochi?
Yeah,
That's lovely and interesting and not overpowering.
right. Again, it's about its textures as well, right?
Yeah,
The things it's used to flavor that way. Yeah.
Sorry.
The connections with fire are interesting to me in terms of like, you're mentioning like moxa and the wool and things. I didn't realize that apparently the kind of hairs that it has on the back of the underside of its leaves apparently are sometimes recommended by folks to gather them and use as tinder as well. I didn't know that.
Anything that's woolly like that will, as it catch it has more surface area, so it will catch a spark if it's dry.
Right.
Really easily. As far as modern magic, it is inseparable from dream magic. I think about that with and specifically there you have the parallel between it being a traveler's herb, but now traveling on the night roads, as I think Shulgi calls them, the walking herb of the night roads.
Right. Wayfaring in both body and spirit.
Yeah. So the use of mugwort tincture as being something that you can dilute in almond oil, on Shulki's recommendation, to put underneath your nose and beneath your ears and beneath your eyes to kind of have the constant smell be something you're inhaling while you're sleeping. Burning whole leaves. I have some lovely notes here. Whole leaves are burned for purifying smoke. A salt may be made by grinding dried leaves and stems and compounding them with ash or bone dust, in addition to the plant's oleum essentia. Leaves may be added to spirits of cane, and over time will produce an aromatic wash of great power. As a walking herb, the juice of her leaves anoint the soles of the feet, and the fresh sprig kept close at hand protects the wayfarer from burglars and marauding beasts.
Interesting. Burglars are in there as well. I mean, this is protection to travelers boils down to like wild animals and wild people. That's interesting when we get to there's some thief stuff in Opal when we get to it.
The strength of her virid light shines more strong by night in the form of an oneric balm. Her essential oil may be better than any dreaming salve, or yet in the minute dose of 1/4 drop, be spun with a single drop of almond oil and used to anoint the brow, or yet beneath the nose, that is, so that the inhalation in sleep might be constant. An effective oneric unction of greater complexity may be compounded in the following manner. In the hour of the moon, or when she is favored among the planets, take of virgin olive oil, 60 milliliters. To this, add 15 drops essential oil of mugwort, 80 drops essential oil of blue chamomile, 5 drops rose otto, and 2 drops of jasmine absolute. The wrists, ankles, temples, and forehead are anointed to slumbering. For those wishing to potentiate this formula, Dried root of belladonna may also be added in a quantity of 3 grams by steeping ground powder in the oleum for a space of 1 week, then straining. These, in turn, might be combined with fats of animal or vegetable origin and with honey or beeswax like rue. Mugwort is a uterine stimulant and can be a drastic abortive fasten. Use of this herb should be avoided by pregnant women.
Yeah.
He'll then go on to use it within the urn of dreaming and the charm of the dreaming vessel that is part of the section on dreaming. I think it's the Book of the Spirit Meadow within Verdarium Umbris. So there's also the belief, according to some, that Mugwort is a great arbiter, and I think that is the word I mean, like just advocates for you to other plants, and therefore has to be treated with respect because of this. I just think it's also because it grows so quickly around, it is not shy. It's not a shy plant by any means. But yeah,
no, not shy at all. There's a lot of Mars to it. I think that's how Culpeper planetarily pigeonholes it, which makes sense in terms of its bitterness. It's like you were talking about, like it can help provoke gall. It's its combustibility. It's warding against bugs and all sorts of other bad things. And just fascinating example of like planetary ascription, because it's also so heavily tied to the moon, especially in its dreaming stuff, right? And so another example of like plants their relation to the stars is also down to how we work with them and what we're trying to do, as much as it's some like essentialist quality. Or like,
I actually think Culpeper says Venus.
Oh really? There we go. I'm maybe thinking of, because I know he goes off on a huge tear about wormwood.
Yeah, wormwood is Mars.
Yeah, because he uses that as like, this is maybe not the greatest herb of Mars, but he goes off on a whole diatribe about how people don't use martial herbs enough because they're scared of its violence. But sometimes you need to be aggressive about the things that are eating your clothes in the closet and things like that. Oh, okay, Venus. All right, interesting. So the more of a interesting Artemis and so on.
Yeah, often it will be ascribed lunar by many herbalists.
Yeah.
Because of its relationship to female hormonal cycles. But Venus is, in my understanding, in that time period, especially anything female systems is still connected to Venus.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the venereal, right?
Yeah, because the moon is so variable that that's not who you necessarily want all your health to be placed under.
Right. And again, planetary ascriptions aren't mutually exclusive categories. Like, it can have many patrons in the stars, many different stars it follows and turns towards and instantiates their blessings in the world. Yeah.
There was something that came up yesterday in a panel I was on it was making me think about the ascription and the categorization of our materia in the modern magical tradition is still heavily influenced by astrology and planets in that way. Maybe elements, maybe an influence of like energetics from an Eastern sense in that way, which is still humoral and part of the Western canon in that way. And thinking about how cultures that don't necessarily put emphasis on planets, how are they doing it? Like Nigerian having so much heavily to do with classification through mythological entities, which is still the same thing. It's just that it lacks the planetary foundation as being the source. And that is it so much in practice, the question can still, as far as musing upon it, is it top down or bottom up? Are we classifying the planets based upon, I would assume, based on what we see here on Earth and those, the associations with those planets in that way, even though in the metaphysic it seems like it's a top down thing. In the explanation of why these plants have these virtues, it's a top down thing. And Buruni and rays coming down. But at the same time, we classify according to how we observe and what we experience. So that's our whole system of prejudice as a human race. So it's interesting to think of this of like, okay, I don't know what this is, but that thing, is it a taste profile? Which it kind of is. Is it, which part of the plant are you gathering? Where it's growing, how it's growing, all these other things. And so, the roots of a Venus plant are still Saturnine. There's just like, which one are you harvesting and for what? And so when does the ritual begin? When does the planetary ascription begin? When I notice what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And again, when I'm using what I already know to talk about what I don't yet know, right? I don't know this plant, but it's spiky, and when I touch it, it stings me. Those are martial instantiations, as I've said before.
Stings me like all women do.
Ever since they sniffed out my money, yeah. Again, as I said before, like a scorpion is martial because it stings. It doesn't sting because it's martial, right? I think about it very much as bottom up. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's just interesting to think about that, to flip it. And I think that's helpful to prevent against blind substitution and to prevent against error, is to always go bottom up. Like, if nothing else, that allows you to say, I do not have this plant, but I have this plant, and I am naming these qualities as to why I'm associating it with it and can use it in this thing.
It does these things. It looks like this thing. It grows with this stuff. It has this effect in the world. Yeah.
Yeah. I name you Dragon's Blood is going to work better with a red pen than a black pen.
Right.
And that's little techniques of 90s magic.
Because we're not substituting a name, we're substituting a substance, an effect. Right. Yeah. Category error. Well, speaking of like categories and of things, I guess changeable as it turns. Feel like bringing in opal here is interesting. The main thing I found is a repeated. I think it's from Pliny. Isidore makes a big deal of it as well. But opal is talked about in its variousness, right? Pliny talks about it as having the flame of carbuncle, of the purplish gleam of amethyst, of the sea green of emerald. And so we have this like kind of chimera stone to a certain extent, that like it depends how you look at it, and it depends its position and what light's playing off it as to what qualities, what ways it colors the world are kind of known. And so like in speaking of Optalio, the Peterborough lapidary says it has as many virtues as colors, which is like, oh, okay, that's helpful, but not necessarily helpful. It's a stone, again, very associated with eyesight. And as I said earlier, with there's a lot of thief lore attached to it as well. So it's said to preserve the eyes. It's said to make them clear and sharp, as well as specifically to guard against various ocular diseases, but various forms of blindness. And then out of those mentions of blindness, there's usually some reference to its patronage of thieves, as when you want other people to be blind, not you. So as a thief stone, it's said to screen robbers with a thick fog, making them invisible, and also said to improve the thief's sight. It's also called like ophthalmius, apparently, at various points. So explicitly, the whether that's a folk attribution or forward attribution, the idea of it, it again being linked to the eyes specifically. Attribution. And the eyes that receive all the different light, right? Is worth thinking about. There are other the other angle on like extending it's a thing thieves carry is not just for invisibility. It's also said, at least Le Couteau prays a bunch of ancient and pre-modern sources about its the bearer of it, the owner of an opal, is said to not be able to be arrested or restrained as well. So another reason, whether that's from like we've noticed thieves carrying it, so obviously it's successful for them in some way. Also, interestingly, again in terms of like monsters, he quotes that it said if magic letters are carved on it, it will banish Hecate's phantasms, apparently. Which I also find interesting in terms of not just is it banishing, or are you invisible to spirits as well as to homeowners?
Yeah, and it's interesting with the kind of the firing of opals, which is always an interesting point. And I've heard it many times that fire opals are not what people think they are. They're actually quite boring as far as opals go, and the fire that is in normal opals, that shine, that iridescent shine, is actually called fire as well. So a lot of people say, "Oh, it's a fire opal." Like, no, fire opal is a very specific stone. Anyway, the belief there might be similar to It reminds me of Kumbo and greening. So the frog venom that you take
Yeah.
for health benefit, that the forest sees you as one of its own.
Yeah.
And so there's something to carrying this stone where you are rendered not necessarily invisible, but rendered as harmless or not the target of, things that are not fully material in this world.
Something that danger doesn't need to pay a lot of attention to.
Yes. Yeah. That you too phase in and out of existence. So you are not the droids they seek. The Greek myth of it being formed from the tears of Zeus after he defeats the Titans.
That's what it was. I was looking for a Greek historian. I was wondering like if it was it's a bodily fluid usually, right? I was wondering if it was blood. That's really interesting because I came across some like anecdotal Italian folklore from a dear friend of both of ours who was saying that their grandmother wouldn't have it in the house because she said it indicated grieving or indicated sadness. You would maybe wear it when you were grieving, but as a result, if you wore it, there would be something to grieve about.
Yeah, it has a lot of misattributed lore in general. It's considered to be bad luck to a lot of people, and that's primarily because of its association with the plague, and that a rumor that a person's opal went dull after they pass, fire, and it doesn't have the longest lifespan because it is a more fragile gem. It is like regular glass. It is not something that it can't be smashed around a lot. But it also, the 1829 novel, Anne of Geierstein, I think that's what it's called. Anne of something that starts with a G, and not Green Gables. The authors released one chapter at a time. And so the story of a woman who's falsely accused of being a demoness and dies soon after a drop of holy water accidentally falls upon her opal, destroying its color. You learn that she's actually poisoned, but the rumors started circulating that the opal itself was a warning that opals bring misfortune. And so it was, I think, several decades, maybe 60, 70, 80 years, that opals suffered this kind of like, we're not able to sustain opals as jewelry for a while because of this. And it wasn't until they found massive, breathtaking opal deposits in Australia. And then, of course, you had to find new ways to advertise opal.
That's fascinating, right? Again, we're back to when is something the sign of a disaster, and when does that become attributed as the source of that evil?
Yeah. Similarly, I know that as far as Northern Africa, it's said to be pieces of lightning or rainbow, which makes sense.
Yeah.
There's less flashy gemstones out there too, called African opals, which are then used because of the name opal, even though it doesn't have any of the fire that people are saying that they're looking for, which is always interesting. When it's like using Herkimer diamonds in place of diamonds. And you're like, well, it's a diamond. Like, is it though? Is it? Or was that a clever naming by the owner of the Herkimer mines?
Well, again, the names that carry, right? The difficulty of so much like archaeobotany and archaeolapidary is like it's the yellow one, or it's the hard one, or it's the soft one. Yeah.
And then opal's assertion, as you said, like making yourself invisible. Therefore, I associate with any goetic spirits that are claimed to do the same, especially like Baal. And the kind of toadsy-eyesian nature of opal.
Yeah, like a solary and lunar kind of lunary force together. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and it's all the colors, right? It potentially again like the wealth of what is seen and what is unseen.
Yeah, I believe associated with miracles. I know there is some prayer somewhere to Saint Rita that mentions opals, or like the opal like heart or something that's associated with Saint Rita, and that's probably just because of the association with miracles that opals have, which I think is a Shakespearean reference as well. But yes, so opals, fascinating, lovely stone, many versions of it.
right, so we're gonna go to. I think we could make hay either out of the fork in the river. Want to talk about scrying now, or do we want to touch on some Via stuff,
I
or
feel
both
like
at once?
scrying is a natural thing, right? Because at least the fire of the opal is such an interesting because it's a physical property of the stone.
Yeah.
And we bring it out by polishing and faceting and things like that.
Mm.
However, scrying is so interesting because when I was grown up, a young boy investigating crystal balls and things like this, there were many books that literally described the passage of clouds or shimmer or shine or opalescence over the face of the crystal ball as being truth is being told, the person is false, this is about a lover, this is not about the types of clouds, occlusions, and asterisms that you would see in the crystal.
Mm-hmm.
And some people would recommend like the light of a single candle on the other side between you and the client and things like this. And now when you look into scrying, it is almost unanimously said to be an internal state brought upon by the gazing into a reflective surface.
Yeah. This is what I wanted to get into. All right. Exactly. Like, how much is it noticing, and how much is it mediumship with an object or a liquid or a container of liquid? Right. When do we call it noticing things, and when do we think about it as how much is it noticing more of the world, and how much is it withdrawing from the distractions of the world?
How much of it is association versus dissociation?
Yes, that's a great way of putting it.
And like fire scrying is its own thing, but fire scrying specifically, okay, we might see like shapes and things in the fire, but fire scrying feels distinctly dissociative to me. Whereas crystal gazing, I don't know, the people that I know that are very good at it, they're still very, very present. And maybe that's just the quality of a good scryer. I'll be in another world real quick, and I'm, people ask you what you think 2 minutes later, and like lifetimes. So I'm curious that this, I think as the occult revival and all of its, humps and waves and permutations and tides, as we go towards this extremely, like we're going to scientifically explain everything we possibly can.
Yeah.
The tendency now has become that scrying triggers an internal experience, whereby internal vision is explored. Where in the past, maybe because of lack of differentiation between internal and external vision, which has a historical basis as well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
That maybe there's less of an emphasis. It's just you don't see as much of when the clouds perform are going up or down. And is that just playing with the when you close your eyes too hard or push your eyeball through your eyelid and open them, you see little orbs and things like that.
Yeah.
Is it for that type of thing? Is it when you're looking into water, like actually using the surface of the water as, and what comes across it like an augury of like, oh, it's a little water strider in the lower right-hand corner. What does that mean? Or is it truly just accessing inner vision state? In which case, all divination to a sense could be called scrying.
Right. I think that's part of the issue, not to employ too many thin end of the wedge, inherently conservative arguments, but like how much is it just any information spontaneously generated, right? Like, I think some big part of this, like, internalization is and psychologization is about the removal of the place of spirits here, right? Like the scrying practices I'm familiar with in early modern texts and practices and accounts, you aren't just praying to God for visions. You are praying to have the ability to have the vision, sure, but you're also praying for the ability to be able to call a spirit, an angel, or an unclean spirit into the stone or mirror or glass of water or oiled thumbnail or what have you. And that's the spirit that brings the vision. Either directly you see the spirit and it informs you of some things, or that spirit itself shows you something or brings in another spirit, right? The three good angels operations that you find all over the early modern cunning folks working books of you bring the angels in to ensure that the vision you're going to have is clear, but they might need to bring you a spirit of vision or prophecy to actually deliver the thing. So this idea of
three good angels come and then they bring you a mirror within your scrying mirror.
Yes. Yeah, it's mirrors all the way down. Yeah, exactly. Also, yeah, you see that in some cases more with object-led divination. I've been looking at various ways of determining guilty parties by throwing pebbles or balls of clay with names in them into water, and the clay and the water itself is conjured. So there's this like that kind of layer of what it looks to me at least like an animism or a crypto animism of like even then you're still talking to something. You're still asking the water to move the pebble that you've just named for so and so as having stolen your linens or bewitched your cattle or what have you. And so this place of like, yeah, when is it internal as opposed to when are you being more? When is the world of spirit something that's relegated to an interior imagination as opposed to exploring the imaginal fields of a living and organic naturally magical cosmos that you are in and participating more in?
Yeah, I I think that's interesting too. It's just the opal parallel of like having seen old espiritistas and voodoo-sans, especially those two specific traditions of like taking a glass of water and blowing cigar smoke into it.
Mm.
To then look at the patterns the smoke is making over the surface of the water, and then also what the visions do, which is also that it mimics Hollywood in the sense of like the smoke coming into the crystal ball and clearing, and a vision is there.
That's found in the excellent book in the journals. They talk a lot about a lot of those spirits don't just, sometimes it's talked about as a shadowy thing in the stone or crossing across the stone, but most of the time the spirits that they talk to or the visions they have, which are described very clear of like they see themselves in this landscape, are, and how much is that like seemingly like the screen broadcasting the helicopter with the bird's eye view of them in the room, same with Dean Kelly. But a lot of the time it's talked about there's a cloud that comes from within the stone or across the stone, and from that cloud something forms. So it's not immediately looking for like suddenly the screen turns on and there's a Zoom call waiting for you. It's the idea that like seeing the tenebrosity of it is a step in of itself before something else can happen.
Yeah, certainly. Associations here with Joseph Smith, not Pocahontas, Mormons, and the seer stones that allows him to I think there's 3 stones which were on the treasure hunting experiences in New York, and then he puts one in his hat to read what the miraculous reflections from the like it's
he's reading through the stone, and that's
reading through the stone, but then they also place the stone in the upside down hat and look at the stone with your face in the hat. So it's creating a dark environment looking into a reflective surface. But it's you see a portrayal of that in Big Love amongst that as well. But the Urim and Thummim specifically, like these are he names them that after the biblical divination systems. And that's what allows them to translate. But I love the idea of like looking at something through it, one thing like a TV rock type of thing, but also this thing of like being able to drop it in your hat and go into a dark place really quickly is also just, I don't know where that technology came from. It's quintessentially American and very associated with Mormons now, but it's also a wonderful thing of like, oh, we need a quick scrying session. Hold on, I'll be right back. And
it's very practical, right?
A few drops of mugwort oil in your hat, put that stone in there and just go in and come back with like God has said you must give me your winning lottery ticket.
The thing that's like on your head as well. Like, I don't know. That feels really, that feels a little bit pertinent. Yeah, excellent piece of tech. The way that it's translations and a language or a message from God also, that has me thinking about like the books of Adam that were said to be for when they address how is it that Adam writes books before Enoch has invented writing, are often to talk about placing the books in stones, and so looking for either particular stones or seeing things spelled out in stones, either on them in their morphology or in a darkened room against a glimmering surface. Certainly the idea that like the stone itself might have a call to activate it is found in a bunch of working books as well. The Cambridge Book of Magic talks about that, as does William Lilly when he's writing up his accounts of magicians he has met and disapproved of. for Elias Ashmole. Talks about how like certain stones, they do have an on switch. They do have a conjurational thing that has to be said for that stone specifically for it to work, and that's just for you to be able to work with spirits with it. That's not necessarily the same as the call to the spirit that will then operate it.
Yeah. I'm curious about scrying games, and which, in truth, games, and now we make divination sound much more serious by separating from that. But in a lot of languages, like in Spanish and in Portuguese, it literally is a game of the mirror, a game of cards, a game of shells,
Yeah,
a game of bones. And then when they say, "Do you want to divine?" they'll say, "Do you want to play?" So it's like there's not much separation between the Ouija board and the spirit board as much, right? Because it is play either way.
Which again, in maybe foreshadowing some De Laurentian themes, like talking boards were popularized as a parlor game, right? As much, or even before they were, they had as much of a sinister reputation.
Yeah, and certainly that a lot of that is on the trails of spiritism, the rising popularity, and also debunking of spiritism is part of the allure of spiritism to be safely practiced within the parlor.
Right. For
Where
entertainment purposes only.
the men do not necessarily think that the women are engaging anything that will actually endanger their souls. Because there's already revolutions happening. There's, Protestantism is heavily underway. There's a rising questioning of the role of God in daily life, going from the previous centuries like deism through to the Industrial Revolution of like, we are the apex species and we will continue going. So like spiritism is interesting because not only does it make things popular and it makes people curious to try things, but the debunking of spiritists also adds to the fervor of we can afford to play at parlor games.
Right.
So
That things can survive by being underestimated.
Yes. And so like then you get the revival of folkloric divination of casting apple peels and things like this.
Tea leaves,
on Halloween, like saying something and turning around to see your lover's face in the mirror becomes very popular. And a lot of these earlier divinations the folkloric divinations are seen as very harmless because it's really just who's going to show me my lover's face or what's my future, does it love me not type of thing. It's nothing like binding. But then you get like the game that I don't know if you grew up with it, but I remember how real Bloody Mary felt as a small child. And like you were definitely afraid to say her name 3 times in a mirror.
Yeah.
And the question for me eventually at one point is like, but I've said it twice, several times. When does it reset?
Yeah.
Like, does it reset when I go to bed? Is she asleep? Or like how long? How do you know when she's asleep? Like all those questions come up for a young wizard.
Oh.
But yeah.
No, definitely. And that's again another example of like psychologists and lab researchers catching up with a bunch of things that folkloric practitioners have been doing for a very long time, right? The experiments with, specifically a Bloody Mary type experiment, right?
Yeah. I think also the historical division of scrying into the Golden Dawn three levels is worth mentioning, of scrying in the spirit vision, which is an emphasis on inner sight, that uses oftentimes individual symbols, but also cultural ones which are adopted as individual, both consciously and unconsciously. And there's traveling in the spirit vision, which is more astral projection, but is still considered to be a form of scrying. And then rising on the planes, which is a spiritual process where you're scrying the Sephiroth or the paths on the tree of life, as the Golden Dawn promoted it, that has the potential to elevate consciousness because you are, in my paraphrasing, you're increasing your container's reception to higher levels by being able to, in spirit vision, go to the places that you would not otherwise be able to go through what you see there and the symbols you behold there and the things that you experience. You are now able to have that experience in the flesh more likely because you have been there in a scrying vision. So it reeks of excellent book kind of thing, right? Of like, the idea that if you're told in this lifetime that you'll attain rainbow body by some prophecy or something, that you can then immediately start praying to your rainbow body self to help you attain rainbow body. Because
right. The self-made prophet.
So like, and there's that thing of like invoking dead magicians to ask them how to invoke dead magicians better, or or any number of things, or invoking your future self to show you how to invoke your future self better. Like, and so there's a lot of layers that come with this, and scrying seems to be very much about um, the different levels of vision in this way.
Yeah, I like that sense of like the things you again to get back to the like kind of existential epistemology, like the things you encounter allow you to now speak from where you encounter that elsewhere. That
Yeah,
like you are not just broadening your horizons, but like you have more colors in the palette now to be able to recognize those things elsewhere. You have a name for that thing. This is very alchemical innuendo as well, right? Like, well, not very innuendo, but very alchemical emblematics. That you're able to, yeah, to you've not inoculated yourself, but you can taste that thing in the mix now because you've tasted it in the kitchen.
yes.
Hmm.
Or that like even tasting that cooking reference, like because you have eaten this food once at a restaurant, and if you have the experience of how to cook, you are more likely to be able to recreate that recipe through your own having done the work of study and then tasting it with a certain awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
So, lovely little scrying, which I think is worth pointing out that scrying we associate with, crystal balls and crystals and water and fire, but it is as much associated with clouds, and
Mm.
at the vault of the sky, which is either liquid or solid, depending on, contextualization culturally and time period wise.
Yeah.
But also the great black mirror of the phone. Now that we literally, the joke and the parallel that we scry our answers, and it just happens to be through Wikipedia or through Google or Ask Jeeves or whatever your search engine is.
And maybe crucially, what happens when we turn our phone off and actually like kind of
Stare at the reflection.
yeah, rumination is perhaps the wrong word, but like yeah, when we let the stuff settle, but the black screen of the ideas that I was reading about the neurology of why things come to you in the shower when you're not actively sat at your desk being like I have to work this thing out. How do I think about this? How do I talk about this? That like allowing your conscious mind to be, I mean, I guess we're into some very general territory here, but like of shutting off the active doom scroll or Wikipedia hole allows stuff to settle and reformulate and allows a bunch of your unconscious or subconscious to put things together. But again, it feeds off what you've put in. It just might take it a while to digest it.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, to kind of push that forward into Via, I suppose like being able to see the destination makes the road a lot more secure.
Yeah.
That if Via and that solid line of four dots, that tightrope line of Ogbe, like it's a lot easier to tell when you're off the path if you see the destination, if you see your destiny.
It is. It is. Yeah, exactly. Like the sense of sight and of trust in that as well when you can't see it. Via is as much about the. It is a figure of mystery, like in many schools of Ramo, like, and although not all, and it's kind of over talked in some cases, I've been told, but it doesn't necessarily. In some cases, it does, but it doesn't necessarily give a clear yes or no answer. It's often talked about as being an up in the air thing. So it's about what you do when you can't see the road, as well as having the vision. It's also about what happens along the way, right? Of the journey. It's kairos, not chronos, right? It's indirect routes. It's be aware that you will not be able to budget time for this because some things will happen quicker than you expect and some things will happen slower. But you will be where you need to be. And there's a sense of like trusting the process quite commonly, despite being a figure of mystery and occasionally of like the heel turn of like a superior not being trustworthy. It generally says like it's good to not like put all your money on black, but like that it's a mystery that you can trust. There's a lot of trustworthiness. There's a lot of people are not consciously deceiving you in Via. There's just also a lot of changeability and a lot of the dynamism of the moon. And yes, a lot of like turning other figures inside out. But there's also not just the sense of like sight of the destination, but also like literally constantly talking about the flow of information. Like there are houses that we can consult about. Is the message reliable? Is this information accurate? What's the news going to be? But pretty much every delineation of Via across the 12 houses has some sense of like there's some kind of information, there's a transmission, and if you're able to have the scrying eyes for it, there's a reception of information, of news, of knowledge, of wisdom as well. But it's not necessarily where you were looking for it a lot of the time. But the circuit is live, right? It's not just mystery because because someone doesn't want to explain it. There's definitely, it feels like some lessons about trusting the process, even when, and a lot of stuff about like life, the river of life is not controllable. Your efforts to the more, very, very, Princess Leia, the more you tighten your grasp, the more systems will slip through your fingers. And so again,
but it's still in opposition to populace, which is we're talking about the indeterminacy of Via. Via is still very determinate compared to populace.
Oh yeah, there's still something actually happening.
Yeah, so like I agree that like you don't know the river of life, you can't predict, but it's a river. You're either upstream or downstream.
Yes.
It's not. I don't know. I don't want to focus too much on the like, oh, I'm lost because it's Via. No, Via is the road. If you're in the bush, that's different, but there's still a road. You might choose the wrong way. You might now have a road that is so steep because you're the destiny you want to accomplish is such a fine point between things that it's like passing a blade of grass between a rock face.
Yeah,
but it's easy to slip from that. And that's uncertain. Your success is uncertain necessarily, but there is now a road. No other figure provides that as much as Via. So I know it's not always a yes in most systems, but I'm coming biased from an Orisha perspective where like it's the automatic yes. It's you now have a path. No other sign is called the path. That's an important side of it. Your head might get lost on the path. You might be so I want to go this way. I want to go this way. No, is this the way I want to go? But you have a path, and no other sign is called with any definitive source in that way. Populace being like the marketplace, or the crowd, or for me the new moon as opposed to the full moon of Via. Like there is light. It might not be the blazing sun, as it is in Ifa, right? Where like Via is Ogbe is the sun and Oyeku is the moon. Populace is the moon, but it's still. There is that light, that Saint Rita stab of lightning going from the cross to her forehead. The miracles are accomplished along the road. This is where vision comes in that way. Can you trust the vision? No, but it is still something that you can work with.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel like. I'm not trying to say what the hell are you talking about. I'm just...
No, I think that's really important when we're talking about like these all these mysteries that we don't fall into even unconscious like fatalism or a sense of like like you said like a woe is me about not knowing enough things. There's absolutely. There is definitively a path, and in studying rivers, you will know something of how the river works, and what you can do with what you have and where you are, and not just and the momentum as well as the moment. No, absolutely. I think that's a really worthwhile thing to emphasize.
I think, in fact, like one of the enemies to the interpretation of this sign, at least as I might understand it, in any of these systems, like. Your downfall is when you try and make a wheel of fortune out of it and be like, your head is up your ass. Like, this is the spine. This is the head above the feet. Every point of the body is active. All elements are on point, literally, and you move forward. Your feet and your heart and your voice and your head are in alignment. There's no other figure like this. This is the goal. This is the sign of road opening, right? Within a cosmogram. When you're trying to make sure that the medicine we correct to this sign.
Yeah.
We want all points active. We want the roads open. We want you to choose. It doesn't make the choice for you. And that's the problem, is that some people get stuck and they're like, no, tell me what to do. Hey, this is a choice. This is all, you're asking for money, and this choice will lead to money. It might not be your ideal job. It might not be the marriage that you want, but you asked for money, and this sign is saying, here's a way to money.
Yeah.
So again, your head up your ass can be the enemy here when you try and, turn yourself into a Pisces Aries marriage. Nothing against that in reality. But in our own bodies, because like the interestingly, Via locks in many ways the Wheel of Fortune of like accept your position, like the reality of it, not necessarily to say that you can't excel, because the Wheel of Fortune is partially about it, like even if you try to control it, like it's gonna flip. But there is something there to be like, you can't realistically look at anything until there is light shown upon it and you can see it for what it is. And for me, Via is very much that. Via in this side, I always associate Via in Baraja Española with the Ace of Coins, which is the first card of the deck in Baraja Española. This is St. Jude and the Blazing Coin, that this is success. It does not mean that you are successful. It means that in this instance, there is a map towards success. Are you going to follow it? Because now you're asking for it to be easy. That's not what it is. It's a road. Travel is always dangerous. Or there wouldn't be traveler's charms.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think there's a lot of beautiful things in it, and it's not a sign that falls for everyone. And certainly it gets mixed up the minute you come into like it you can find ways to add up to it again, so it can reappear, but it's still the primacy of it, even though there's not as much of a standard order in geomancy. In the world geomancy systems, Via is a contender for the first spot almost always.
Right.
There is some, I've seen alternates, of course, but by the time you add in, especially if you add in Ifa and its derivatives, like Via's up there. It's the start of all things, because you can't start a book if the book doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And Via is, everything is concrete. It might not be good.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean fortunate. It just, we are fortunate to see your disfortune.
Yeah. But again, if you deny that you are on the road after you've been, after you are, the feet have met the concrete and you even have the map, then that's on you.
Yeah. Well, then we go into things like, why does Cauda Draconis look so dangerous to me? It's like, where's the fire? Where's the head? Where'd it go? Like, so rampant destruction, you've lost yourself to passions. Being headless is sometimes a nice thing, and other times perhaps not. Or, Caput Draconis of like, where's the road? You could be on the road and your feet are not firmly planted on it. Your head can think, oh, I see the road. Your heart believes, I'm on the road. Your gut, your desire is burning. I'm on the road. And your feet are like, what road? That's hard, because you'll destroy everything trying to find the road. You'll be like an ant trying to go around an object. Yeah. Like, just keep hitting it until I find a place to go around. Which, hey, at least that might change it eventually. I don't know. Yeah. And I know not everybody ascribes elementals so strongly to the geometric points. That's definitely an Arabic and an Ifa influence, but it's fruitful.
I think so. I'm looking at where two dots is absence as well as passivity.
Yes.
Where that takes us.
The empty bag.
Mm-hmm.
You're focusing on the bag because there's nothing in it.
Yeah.
And like, even when we do the hand signs, right? The from Polyphemus from Sam, of like the extended finger is 2 because it's easier to show, but it's starting with nothing, that the hand is open, and that if you have something, the hand is closed, and so the grip towards the center is in effect the active point, as opposed to the resting of the open hand. So
the things that fall out,
is grabbing fully, and that's a thing, as opposed to populace, which is filmy. And that's something it's interesting, just from it starts in that, oh, you got me an empty bag, thank you. That's the thing you say when the bag's empty. And I know Carker in bags, but still populace, and the 2 points of like, is geomancy about 2 versus 1, or is it about 3? Because when they do those charts, the old brass machines that calculate charts for you, it's 3 points, because you have to have the 2 on the side and 1 in the middle. in
Yes.
order to make it look like the figure, which
Yeah.
it's a different consideration. Symmetry is always going to win out in our head. Have to be 3. So 3 times 4 is 12, which is an interesting side of it too. And then when you do that, you look at the hands and you actually have 3 joints on each finger, which
Right.
then can be like, oh, now you can flag geomantic points on the fingers in a different way that you couldn't before when
Yeah.
you acknowledge 3 versus 2. So is it binary or is it something else?
Right. The space that you need to be able to chart those things. Yeah. So yeah,
I did you mean I don't even know what I was gonna say.
So yeah, interesting to pair it with the Wheel of Fortune, right? Like you said, again, this sense of things changing, of being on something that is changing, and how much that's becomes about that this too shall pass, as well as I was talking to our mutual dear friend Miss Jackie about the Wheel of Fortune and her taking a very folk Catholic view of like the spokes as Catherine's wheel and the idea of being tested by the wheel and having to work. And this isn't a dumb luck card or just that the pendulum must swing back. And obviously it's informed by whatever else is around, but that this is about work as well as a bunch of historical material about rising and falling, and about like the folly of believing that your position is immutable.
Yeah, you see the 4 evangelists on this card classically. You do see the rota, the tarot, reorganized, that we can see wheel in there. What's the sigil of? I forgot in my head. It's showing salt, sulfur, and mercury, and it's the evangelicals, right? Because then it shows the water as well. But yeah, this is O Fortuna of Carmina Burana. This is Lady Fortune, who is folk Catholically Saint Catherine, Catarina, as far as the lovely weird orangish set monster hominid that's stuck to the bottom of the wheel.
Yeah. Which becomes Hermanibus, or however you say that. But at least by Levy's Alphonse Constant's Transcendental Magic in 1856. So he explicitly calls it the Wheel of Ezekiel, and that seems to very much spur more of the evangelists and their animal heraldry, and then calls it Hermanibus on the right, ascending on the right, Typhon descending on the left, and a Sphinx in equilibrium above. It was interesting to look at the where that kind of comes from. I ended up taking a dive on that rather than more of the alchemical stuff, because there's some fascinating kind of history with all that going on, which kind of again includes a bunch of chimeras at various points, and of things that look like they were depicted one way on the card. So the Sphinx itself looks like it comes in the Budapest tarocchi, and the influencing the Noblet tarot, Noble, of mid 17th century. The descending figure is wearing this pleated skirt and looks almost like a comet with a face, and the figure on the top is a king with a crown and a baton and a flaring cloak that starts being interpreted as wings, and from there that king figure, the one on top, and that's historically where that's been, like the late medievalists depicting people in stages of life and ambition. The figure, the ascending figure on the left is I will reign. The top is regno, I do reign, and the descending is I have reigned. And then sometimes the one right on the bottom is I am without reign, right? Sum sino regno. So it's a king that then their cloak starts to be depicted as wings, and so they start to be depicted as by the time you get to the Arnaud or Amphau Marseille, which is late, but like shows it, again, doesn't come from nowhere. The figure starts to be an actual Sphinx type chimera, and the earlier examples of those kind of mixture of human and animal seem to come specifically from the influence of like a particular image in Sebastian Brandt's Ship of Fools, the Das Narrenschiff, which is a bunch of woodcuts depicting like the vices and the follies of society and the church in some cases, which is, I think, partly why it becomes such a bestseller. And in that one, the top figure on the wheel is entirely animal, funnily enough. And it's often said that this is because and they're all different kinds of donkey or ass, right? Since only an ass believes he's found permanent security in that precarious position. And the descending figure on the left, in that case, wears a fool's cap, or his bottom half is an animal, and the ascending figure is reversed. The top half is a donkey, because the closer he gets to the top, the more asinine he becomes. So this is a satirist's take, right, on power and ambition and stuff like that. But ultimately, the furthest I found back about like a wheel of fortune concept at all is Boethius, like 6th century Stoic Christian writings, writes the Consolation of Philosophy about like the calm and detached mind that should meet misfortune. And like there's a bunch of biography there where Boethius is like doing very well for himself and the emperor, and then I think he's accused of forgery by a bunch of political rivals, and he loses everything. And the Consolation features his visions of Lady Philosophy, who comes to him and describes fortune, and describes fortune, and even like quotes fortune. And again, interestingly, Lady Philosophy describes fortune as a monster, and that where is the quote? She toys with those for whom she intends catastrophe, showing her friendly face and lifting them up before dashing them down when they are least prepared for it. With an indifferent hand, she spins the wheel, and one or another number comes up lucky, while the only constant is change. And the other one I found is from Consolation is actually like Lady Philosophy quoting fortune. I have a wheel and I turn it so that what is low is raised high and what is brought up is brought down. You ascend, fine, but you must acknowledge that it can't be wrong for you to have to descend again. You are not unaware of how the wheel works. And so there's this kind of stuff around like the wheel of life and the wheel of suffering and the wheel of ambition turning to, again, not being able to keep control of absolutely everything. It's not until like Oswald Wirth, kind of late 20th into late 18th, the 19th into 20th century French occultist, who starts to describe the ascending figure as creation and therefore good, and the descending as pure evil and destruction. And it seems to be from that marrying Levy's idea of Hermanibus and Typhon and the Sphinx balancing them, that we get a sense of like a moralizing put back into it, or I guess it's a different kind of moralizing.
Yeah, you have the whole, I mean, the normal association of ascendancy with good and just the descending wheel with bad, but there's also this like just the notion that turning it is like you need a change, and it evokes Gira Mundo in that way, right? And that the earliest Greek conceptions of the wheel of fortune, it was globular, it was a sphere, like itself, because Discworld came out later, and that it does echo even the Bhava Chakra.
Yes, that's what I was looking for. Yeah,
India and Buddhism. So the idea of the wheel of samsara, whatever this thing that is happening, showing a consequence. And what's interesting in that relationship to Via then is that roads are created by people who follow the same path. And so if there is a possible outcome, then there is a most likely road upon which you are going to walk, which is part of why we do divination. But also interesting to see when elders say, like, I know this, I've been down this road before, and they're trying to stop you. They haven't been down your road, but they've been at their version of it, and they're saying that this flags. I can see the wheel you're on, and there's very few ways that wheel will go other than what I'm seeing and talking about for you. So I think I like the relationship because it's intrinsically tied to the rota, right? It has to be.
Yeah.
There's a lot there that's interesting. The notion too that Waite, when he publishes the pictorial key to the tarot, which is where a lot of modern tarot interpretations come from, but it's almost never negative here. It's like the wheel of fortune is destiny, fortune, success, elevation, luck, felicity. Reversed, it's increase, abundance, and superfluity. And now, when we look at it, usually the reversed is now meaning bad luck, disappointment, misfortune, mishap, unforeseen setback, as opposed to upright, it's chance, changes, destiny, luck, opportunity, and winning. So somewhere along the lines, it switched from weights to, in the popular conception of like, well, this just doesn't make sense. Like if you're, if it's reversed, and it also brings up the question of reversing, because reversing for some people means it intensifies the meaning or that it reverses the meaning. So there's something there too, but it's just
the horseshoe of it, right? Is it raining its luck down more materially, or is it opposite day?
Yeah. And the nature too of the wheel. Interestingly, it I don't know. There's something strange in the way that it's drawn, where because most people have talked about it going one way, but it's actually going the other. Because it looks like ideally in my head it would spell out tarot or this type of thing, but the Yodhe Vauhe actually goes the other way. So you could say that it's saying rota, but either way it's going, that would require the wheel to spin counterclockwise to say either tarot or rota, and to have Yodhe Vauhe and not have it be the other direction. If it's going counterclockwise, then which is why the ascending figure is the Hermanubis, right, and not the one the snake is descending. It's showing you the way the wheel is going. But somehow, because the TARO, our brains can project it going the other way. Which reverses me to ideas about the kind of curved sun wheel that is on Giramundo's Ponto, or different cultures that use the sun wheel see it spinning in different directions based upon whether we look at it like a pinwheel, and that it's broken because of the speed of its travel, or that the curves of the sun wheel or the angles of the sun wheel in the case of the swastika are looking at, like, it's almost like there's a head on a thing and it's going the way the heads are facing on each of the branches. But certainly knowing which way the wheel of fortune is going to fall is its own pastime of ridiculousness.
And again, like, very much it seems in modern readings does reflect more of a sense of, I mean, it depends on reader to reader, but that you that is one of the ones that seems to need other cards around it to clarify, like, what kind of change or what kind of ascension or descension.
This is almost always in an open reading system to be felt that you have to have a context for what this is, that it's good with good and bad with bad.
Right, that old phrase. Yeah.
And therefore highly mercurial in how it forms, and as is ever the nature of Lady Fortune, or Luck Be a Lady Tonight, all the other songs that you can ascribe to this.
Even Kairos herself, when she's depicted, the right moment to act, or the moment to seize action, or to seize oneself and act, is depicted on a it's sometimes looked as a wheel, but it's a ball again. She's staying on the ball by a constant dynamism, a balance that always also moves you forward.
I guess that leaves us really where we went in order. So, speaking of the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, Hamlet. I think it's Hamlet. Our magician, Mr. De Laurence. as far as truth, lie, ascending, descending. It was interesting because I'm not sure why I thought of him when we were trying to come up with an edition, because it's, a lot of these are obviously related to me in some way. Opal and scrying go hand in hand. Like there's a way, and the visions of Camilla, I can see how scrying comes out of that in our creation of a program. But Dolores, Dolores was a product of studying African American hoodoo tradition, as well as Caribbean obia, and looking at those things, of looking at lists where Dolores is literally held up like Merlin.
Yeah.
And the great mage, the great magician Dolores, who is a historical personage that we can very much look up, much like Saint Carlo. But in different permutations of his spelling of his name as well. But really what we have here is someone who was a cut and paster, who had a catalog of magical books that were published, and he would publish, add a few pages on and sell someone as the new revised, and everybody would want that. But having Dolores's book, especially in the Caribbean and the Southern United States, that was the start. That was like, you were already initiated in some way, almost like the Black Books of Sweden, of like, you didn't necessarily need to have done anything. Having that is enough to know that you're dabbling in the dark arts. And so I find Dolores fascinating, especially since it's not like he even got the best versions of all the books that he was plagiarizing.
No.
And pasting.
Not even like he framed them in accordance to their actual historical veracity. The constant working with what was popular to both his American audience and as we'll talk about, like definitely the wider world influence, particularly in the Caribbean and West Africa. Like the trend was that everything was Hindu, that this was East Indian occultism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hindoo becomes synonymous with all magic, or even the fact that the famous quote, "I'm going to work Dolores on you."
Yep.
Right. This is Jamaican, of like, this is, don't make me put him on you. Right. And it's because, like, well, I again agrees to the authorship of all grimoires of like, I'm going to put Mr. Pauline on you. Of whatever it is, of like, well, where does this come from in this way?
The Art of Paul, referring to your weird 16th century book that's chained up in the barn as Anna Grippa. Yeah. And there's countless ethnographers who've talked to various people who I think I found an account in Jamaica especially, where a lot of people are unsure if Dolores is a man or is a set of books or is a practice or even a human person anymore. This absolute like mythologization, if not just legendary status. Yeah, and yet he's a person kicking around in the start of the 20th century. He's born in 1868, supposedly on Halloween. Again, there's a lot of supposedlys, and dies in 1936. Again, supposedly on September 11th. And there's a bunch of stuff about him and his influence in Owen Davies' grimoires, History of Magic books, because he follows not just the pre-modern grimoires, but also what a magic book is into the pulp era and onwards. Davies actually calls Dolores America's most influential occultist, which is is it high praise? Influential, right? Having influenced, especially when we think about like most influential American occultists, not necessarily on all of America, although a sizable part of it.
United Statesian, let's say.
Right. United Statesian, and then again, influence in the wider world, and in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, in Trinidad and Tobago, in Nigeria, even in his lifetime, in Ghana as well. Yeah. So again, being such a recent figure, we do have a fair amount of stuff about who he was and his life and things. He's born in Ohio, I believe.
Yeah, Cleveland.
Yeah, Cleveland. There we go. And He
and he's riding the already strong wave of spiritism, having been, good 20, 30 years in common parlance.
Yeah, and hypnotism as well. His first big job is going door to door, and then he witnesses a hypnotism show and gets very into that and decides he's going to be a Professor de Lawrence and going to do a traveling hypnotism show, as well as offering lessons very quickly and setting up a school of hypnotism in Chicago around 1900, around the turn of the century. And he ends up setting up, so he's infamous for the De Lawrence Scott and Co. Publishing house, right? Which again, it's likely Scott didn't exist. There's no real record of who this Scott is. And he seems very cagey and changes the subject as far as the historians say when asked about it, and again in the newspapers and interviews and things. But it's a spiritual supply mail order house in Chicago, and he sets it up after suing the Hensbury Company for he'd tried to sell his hypnotism. He did publish and sell his book on hypnotism, A Complete System. And the story goes that he goes to the publisher he gave it to, who was then working at Hensbury Company, and is like, where are my royalties? And they're like, well, to offset costs with publishing, and despite the fact that it is selling relatively well, that also means we've had to print more books, and as such, you actually owe us like money. And he did not like that, and apparently sued them and made the capital to set up his own publishing house. Which becomes infamous with himself, the De Lawrence Scott and Co. So his early books are on, again, a bunch of stuff that purports to be Hindu spiritism. One early one is the Sacred Book of Death, which, again, a bunch of historians have pointed out is largely lifted from Kardec. It's at this point that De Lawrence drops the professor of hypnotism as his main kind of like identifier, still calling himself a doctor, but now presents himself more like a swami of some sort, as well as setting up the De Lawrence Institute of Hypnotism, Hindu Magic, and East Indian Occultism, of which he is president. That then leads to the publication of the Great Book of Magical Art, Hindu Magic, and East Indian Occultism. Again, there's a theme here, right? Which Davies describes as a chopped-up version of Barrett's The Magus, with added photographic scenes of India and other extraneous engravings. And apparently the only changes he basically made were to change when Barrett uses we to I. And this is a pattern, right? He finds various texts, various things of Albertus Magnus, Barrett's The Magus, which itself is mostly taken from Agrippa, especially also the 6th and 7th books of Moses, which are incredibly popular, especially in a variety of African-American communities, and especially with those who are looking to explore connections to Jewish religion, mysticism, not just Kabbalah, but not just Kabbalah, as well as like Black Israelite movements. And it certainly seems that De Lawrence Company didn't start that, but definitely stoked and supported it and benefited from it. And then we get the larger influence into African American hoodoo and conjure. Henry Hyatt, in his interviews with 1600 different hoodoos and workers, at one point actually asks someone, so you need like dove's blood, ink, and I think parchment as well to do this. Where do you get that? And the guy is like, there's a guy I know in Chicago. Or there's a thing I know in Chicago. And apparently he's actually a little bit reticent when Hyatt presses him, because he's like, I don't know if naming names is like doing right by people. And he's like, it's okay, I'm a safe source, I'm not gonna shop him to the cops or whatever. And he says it's De Lawrence. That's where you get your stuff to do this. And he's also not just selling books, he's selling charms, talismans, amulets, materials, candles, parchment, ink, all sorts of biz. And that stop me, really jump in at any point, but the thing about like that guy being wary about whether or not it's okay to say his name is like also prescient in terms of the fact that like he has a number of run-ins with the law for a variety of reasons, it seems, but mostly built around initially the scare that he seems to be doing some kind of organization or something certainly branded a cult, cult, not occult. And later that it's various versions of things that might be mail fraud with the post office saying that he's misrepresenting things. So the first of these that I encountered was in 1912. In November, the Chicago police raid his headquarters for suspected mail fraud and actually offenses under the Mann Act, which was the White Slave Traffic Act. And they're worried that this hypnotism school is trafficking people. And this seems to emerge from the complaints and accusations made by a woman, Augusta Marie, who falls out with him for a couple reasons, but one of the primary ones seems to be she's a former aspirant of this Order of the Black Rose that De Laurence either founds or helps set up with a bunch of African-American fellows. And they had a habit of not just nudity in the initiations, but also of like appraising the bodies of the naked women who were trying to apply. And apparently De Laurence told her that she was, quote, too fat to be an angel. And so she, understandably takes umbrage with this and ends up also accusing him, notably in his where the actual like con man, not just book pirate stuff starts to come in. She claimed that De Laurence's hypnotism school had hidden dictographs in the lecture rooms. And so he would record people as they were talking in the antechamber and stuff, and then use that information to pretend to read people's minds. And after the police clear that like he might be annoying people and he might be making awful comments, he wasn't trafficking anyone. He's like charged $200 and his followers and the rest of the order are released. But he's the shop continues to do pretty well as far as we can tell from the books, very well by some estimations. And by April of 1919, he's again tried by the post office for false pretenses, representations, and promises. And that's where we get his trial, which is like 70 pages of them questioning him on what do you sell? What do you know about what you sell? What do you say your stuff does? So it's partly a Freudian mediums thing, less in terms of he's giving readings, although that seems to have been going on as well, and more that he's claiming that stuff can do stuff. And this is where these books and these charms can like affect miracles for people. And this is where either he is trying to do some kind of plausible deniability, or he literally evidences not really knowing the subjects and especially the authors he's pirating and rebranding. They ask him who a bunch of these people that he's whose books they're selling, and he just doesn't know most of the time. And again, whether or not that's like they ask, like you're selling transcendental magic, and he's like, yeah, that's by Levy. And they're like, okay, who's he? And he's like, I think he's a doctor of medicine. And they're like, do you know that? And he's like, I don't know. I don't really know. They ask him about like the Albertus Magnus stuff. He's like, I think he's a biblical character. And again, it's difficult to tell without more context if he's trying to distance himself and be like, oh, I'm just a humble salesman of books and things for entertainment purposes only, or if he's genuinely ignorant about this stuff. He asks him. He at one point is like they ask him about Arthur Waite because he's selling his stuff, pirated, and he's like, oh, he was a man of great repute in England who's died recently, and Waite was still alive at the time. So he's either being again deliberately misleading in court, or he's painting himself ignorantly. But he also is asked like, do you do this stuff? And he does say that like he admits that a lot of his virgin parchment isn't exactly virgin, but he says like he has charms, and he's given his son charms that he believes works, and he certainly met a lot of people who are repeat customers who swear up and down that these charms are doing them favors and aren't that they're doing what they purport to do. And this kind of attention also means that like periodically he's like, there's an infamous occasion where he's like tied up by robbers and they steal a bunch of money, like him and I think his wife as well are like tied up with wire. And apparently most of that money was foreign currency because he is also he's also attracting all sorts of people from all over the world to come and train with him and to learn, especially it seems from Nigeria.
Yeah. There's so much it's also worth pointing out, like, as an editor, Mathers was published by him.
Yeah.
Like the Greater Key of Solomon, the Mathers edition, and the Book of Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage was edited by De Laurence.
Yeah.
It was a popular established thing to the point like 6 and 7 books of Moses, the Master Key. The Master Key is really just a self-help book. It's not quite as overtly magical, but 6 and 7 books of Moses, clairvoyance and thought transference, crystal gazing and the spiritual clairvoyance, the Lesser Key of Solomon, illustrated key of the tarot, the Old Book of Magic, the Great Book of the Magical Art, Hindu Magic, and East Indian Occultism. Yeah. Like, these are for instance, just to put that context there, which I know you know, but just the Obia laws in Jamaica.
Which is still in place, right?
Yeah, which they've been talking about releasing them, but by the time the 1898 ones specifically and the modifications of them, all publications of the Lawrence Scott and Company of Chicago, United States of America, relating to divination, magic, occultism, or supernatural arts, all publications of the Red Star Publishing Company of Chicago, United States of America, relating to divination, magic, occultism, or supernatural arts, they cannot enter the country. These are prohibited items, quote, that are absolutely forbidden from entering Jamaica, some of which include. So even having the book was an open accusation of Obia. And the Obia laws have been there for far longer. But it's just interesting that, like, the publisher is banned. So and then you get the question of the Obia Bible, which was 1898, which is the Great Book of Magical Art, Hindu Magic, and East Indian Occultism. And remember that also you're getting influx of East Indians into Trinidad and other places that also have an Obia practice. Yeah. But there's so much going on here where De Laurence, magician or not, he goes from showing himself in a nice little kind of etching of a suit and a tie based on a photograph, and then to like strict turban with like his spirit guide speaking into his ear at the start of his books. Yeah. And so he's playing up on everything, and it is to sell. It is its own kind of magic, right, in that way. And I don't normally like the, let's say everything that is done with intent or mindfulness is magic, but there is something overtly successfully magical about what he did.
Yeah, I mean, he is promulgating, albeit in pirated form and with some sketchy editing and with some sketchy forewords and some sourcing, like genuine grimoires. Yes. The trial records throughout the 1930s show all sorts of Obia men being asked to do anything from, finding lost property to sending, crappy bosses insane. All had various De Laurence publications of the books, Solomonic texts, all sorts of stuff like that. There's also the 6th and 7th books seem to become part of the loose canon of books that various Rastafarians were reading and promulgating as well. So there's Obia and there's also Rastafarianism that eating it up. And again, they're I would say badly edited, but they are still grimoires, right? It's not like he's just literally selling snake oil or making stuff up. And yeah, these people are using them apparently effectively all over the place. Yeah. Also people are buying his charms and keep buying them. I found that during the 1980s, at some point, a bunch of anthropologists were talking to the Ibibio people of southeastern Nigeria, and discovered that they were ordering and were still ordering charms from the De Laurence company, like expensive charms, and like passing them on and stuff.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. There's influence in some of the photographs that he was sourcing of. It's a prompt to the kind of consolidation of Mamiwata worship, which again was a variety of practices that find this expression and this this renewed interest via these books that are coming in. And Davis talks about the fact that he's successfully exploiting American commercial techniques to repackage and promote the wisdom and mysticism of the East, and crucially not the superiority of the West. And that this is especially influential in Nigeria, partly because it fills a gap in the English-speaking African market for relatively cheap, although he did some fancy editions as well, relatively cheap occult publications. There aren't publishing houses in England making this kind of material available at the time. So these economic factors are going on as what he might have done or not done, but they're still more or less the spirit lists that are in those books. He's infamous for saying that the previous editions of things have been way too corrupted. So there's a fair amount of marketing and advertising based off this is the real biz from his own strange editions and ways of formulating it as East Indian occultism. But yeah, the people are buying them up and are using them in the Windward Islands, in the Caribbean. Even his catalogue itself was thought of as a black art book that could be used to call the devil. So not just So that's where we start to get his full mythical status, and all sorts of stuff about how you can use his name to call down the wrath of God on your enemies without even having the books. Although that was if you had the book, then you knew that you were dealing with a real Obeah man in not a dissimilar way to the vast array of things called the Key of Solomon in the 16th century. That having a Key of Solomon or having an Agrippa was how you knew that you were dealing with a real wizard.
Yeah, I am also intrigued by his consecration as a bishop when it was I think right before he died in the American Catholic Church. So he's seeking it's a spiritualist initiation to help legitimize him with apostolic succession from the American Catholic Church. So that's Arthur Layton. And because of this kind of gearing up for apostolic succession in this way, the Black spiritualist churches in New Orleans suddenly start perhaps embracing a more traditional view of Christianity. And there is a rumor that in his last year of life in 1936, that he consecrated the first bishop, Thomas Watson, in New Orleans, as giving apostolic succession to a Black spiritualist church, and then it spread from there.
Yeah.
So it's interesting his reach, at least we know that he was consecrated by Arthur Layton. Is that part of his practice? Was that part of legitimizing? Who knows? Yeah. Certainly, the man is cloaked in mystery, and as far as Orientalist tendencies of America, that helped greatly. It's interesting that Hindu becomes the catch-all for everything, and he's setting up the proto spiritualist shop, the proto botanica, the proto hoodoo shop.
Yeah.
And it just happens to be associated with a publishing press, and this is prevalent all the way through the modern era, where you go to you had prominent candle shops in Chicago, in New York, in New Orleans, and otherwise just major centers of spiritualist activity,
as well as the Judaicas that were there as well.
Various traditions all over the place, to places like Original Products Now that still have their own publishing and have promulgated certain traditions and republished their own versions of Secrets of the Psalms and 6 and 7 Books of Moses. As this is part and parcel for having a large spiritual supply store. Is if you want literature, here's our bookshelf right here. And since it's public domain, I'm going to make it a little bit flashier. I'm going to redo the cover every 10 years, and go from there.
Yeah. You keep it going, and you keep the reformulation of what's seen as magicians, we've talked about before, across history and people in place are kind of magpie-eyed, right? They're looking not just to what they know about, but the stuff that they don't know about, that the rumors of those people over there who do some interesting stuff. And so, yeah, the marketing might be historically dishonest, but it's also keeping the lights on. And it seems he didn't just exploit like African American communities. He like seemed to work with a lot of black fellas as well, either in various formulations of his orders and things like that, and just as employees and colleagues. It seems there's some controversy over this one Nigerian guy came to study with him. What's his name? Michael Williams, and they ended up falling out because Williams, the women that worked at the shop kept accusing him of looking up their skirts, and so Dolores had an altercation with him and threw him out. And from there, Williams accused him of being a racist and various things. Again, don't know enough to say, but fascinating character, and yeah, the undoubtable influence. This again, the mythologizing must come in some way from actual use, not just from it wasn't just top down.
Yeah, for sure. There is a website for the current company, and it's a small business run out of Michigan City in Indiana, I believe. It's a decidedly Egyptian look to the website, and the catalog that they espouse still has wonderful things from like 30s through 70s occult catalogs in the style of things. But for the most part, it's a bunch of rings for various uses, and then a few like mineral baths and soaps and oil blends and sages towards the end. But yeah, and then like the one that gets me at the end is like I think it's the brass plated protection, the Egyptian brass plated protection. Is like there's something that is wonderfully nostalgic about a time period that I've never obviously lived in, and is not my style of magic, but it's interesting to see the history behind Dolores and to still see it happening from the modern, at least inheritor of the company.
And it still goes on today, right?
And I don't even know if this company is contiguous or if they're just claiming to be. But they do claim that About Us. The DeLawrence Company was founded by DeLawrence in Chicago, Illinois in the 1900s. DeLawrence was a pioneer in the business of supplying magical and occult goods by mail order. Not only was L.W. DeLawrence a successful businessman, he was a teacher, an author, and a publisher. L.W. DeLawrence has many publications still available today. Although it has been said that his company has fizzled out, I'm here to inform you that we still do exist. We run out of a small business location in Michigan City, Indiana.
Right. And how different is that, even if it's not true, from, slapping Agrippa's name or Solomon's name or Albertus Magnus's name or Paracelsus's name on a bunch of tech that you've come across and trying to keep the lights on. Yeah.
Welcome. You've made an important and wise decision. Let DeLawrence help you. Many interests that our catalog and the great books and products in it have been sometimes of incredible help and assistance to those with great ambition, burning desires, and overpowering fears. The occult arts and sciences undoubtedly are old with the wisdom of the ages, but they are new as today too, because the great minds are constantly at work on these great problems, seeking the solution for you and the world to use. Please beware of false companies trying to sell DeLawrence products such as New Guardian Light and Church of Good Luck. I just said that.
Of course they're going to name names. Yeah. And there we're into the other side of like commercial rivalries and things like that. Yeah. And whether or not like people are still engaging in the Orientalism of it, there's that's kind of replaced. There are plenty of folk magic shops and companies that are kind of trading off a certain, like you said, a certain nostalgia or even a certain kitsch.
Mm-hmm. I love that there's a website up. I don't think I'm going to order anytime soon, but I love that there's a website up. They have his turban picture in the upper left-hand corner.
Mm-hmm.
So Sancto Google to the rescue. But yeah. All right. Well, I think we've done DeLawrence pretty good justice there, such as one can.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything left on the list to talk about. That was a really long sentence for no reason.
No, I think we've made every stop on the The
It's the
occult
cause
Sesame
of in
Street.
creation where I learned the most. Yeah. So, okay. On that note, thank you so much for listening with us today. I'm sure we'll stitch this together in some way over the next few minutes, but just taking a second to do the thing we always say we're going to do and then forget, which is please visit us at our website at radiofreegolgotha.com. We do have a talk section on there, which we try to keep up to date as far as talks and lectures. Al, yours is Dr. Alexander Cummins. Is that your website?
AlexanderCummins.com. Yeah.
AlexanderCummins.com. I have JesseHathawayDiaz.com. We are both trying to keep them up to date. So you have some resources there to bribes, wedding proposals, and death threats can all go to those accordingly. And there's a few engagements for the rest of the year for both of us, and mostly we enjoy being reclusive and occasionally having tea in person.
Absolutely, yeah. Also, please feel free, if you haven't yet, check out the Facebook affiliated Facebook group of folk necromancy.
Yes.
And you can find us on find me on the gram as at Grimoires on Tape, where I post updates about talks and things like that as well.
But surprisingly, no Grimoires on Tape.
Not yet. I'm working out how to record them still. But I've plans are in motion. Circles within circles, wheels within wheels. It
was just a red herring.
The prophecy will be fulfilled.
Nah. But yes, anything. Hopefully, we'll have a few more Speakeasies of the Dead in the future. So please, that's also speakeasyofthedead.com, but it's also a section on our RFG website. And if you like what we do, just send us a note. It's nice to hear from you occasionally, as long as it's only good things. But
no, it is nice. It's very nice.
All right. Well, I wish everyone a happy Feast of St. Camilla, and much praise and love to Cooper for getting this out as soon as he could. Happy, may all your visions lead you to a sugar daddy buying you a convent, and still be doing the work. Whether that's publishing pirated texts to your own monetary gain, or consecrating bishops, or using the opal to hide from your enemies, or to wish disaster upon the Victorian bride that gave you the evil eye last week when you told Mugwort that it was, a wonderful herb. Yeah. All right.
Yes, indeed. Thanks, everyone. Cheers very much.
Bye. All right, turn this shit off.